appointments, bills brought from the Honourable House of Representatives, petitions, papers, reports from committees, notices of motions given orally, questions and answers to questions, motions that may be made at the commencement of public business requiring notice, motions relating to the sitting of the Senate, motions for leave to introduce bills, the presentation of bills without the leave of the Senate first obtained, public business. Minister? Senator Knight?
President, is it possible to recommit statements by ministers?
The question is that the item statements by ministers be recommitted. All in favor?
Aye.
Against?
Thank you. I asked the Minister of Foreign Affairs. You had undertaken about 4 sittings ago. Pardon me? Yeah, you told me you would do it at the next sitting.
Senator Knight, we have 3 State of the Nation. You want to do it after, and in the interim the copies can be provided?
All right, okay.
Okay, so we'll recommit appropriately. Okay, thank you. Public business? Public business?
Thank you, Mr. President. Mr. President, as indicated, it is intended to continue the State of the Nation debate today. The first presenter to continue and conclude, indeed, sir, the State of the Nation debate. Our first presenter today will be Senator Morgan, followed by Senator Fraser-Binns, and thereafter the debate will be closed by Senator Samuda. Senator Morgan.
Thank you very much. Senator Morgan.
Thank you, Mr. President. Mr. President, as I rise to make my presentation in this State of the Nation debate, I would like to thank my family who have supported me throughout this journey as I chart a course in the interest of my community. I must also express my appreciation to the Prime Minister, whose guidance and tutelage has been essential to my journey. I take not for granted the confidence he has reposed in me in appointing me to this chamber. To you, Mr. President, your words of wisdom and constant support are appreciated, as well as that of my other colleagues. I take it not for granted that you have welcomed me among your cohort, providing me with guidance and assistance along the way. I wish to express gratitude for the many phone calls of support, as well as those who have reached out to me with criticisms and encouragement. You have all contributed to my continued growth and development as I seek to add my voice and action towards the prosperous enterprise we seek to build. I make special mention of the leader of government business, whose poise and grace are not only an inspiration, but an example. You continue to navigate the government's legislative agenda with purposeful dexterity, even in the face of vocal challenges and opprobrium. You demonstrate that with a good heart, a clean mind, and a conscious spirit, we can all rise. To the members of the opposition benches, There are some outside these walls who may presume that our debates are in vain, but I thank you for keeping me on my toes and causing me to constantly contemplate my approach to legislation and debate. I thank you for your welcome and your constant scrutiny. Mr. President, the theme of my presentation is a new Jamaica for a new generation. While we as a country have made significant strides, While we as a country have made significant strides in fostering equality among our people, there is still significant work to be done to ensure that all Jamaicans can have an equitable opportunity to succeed in this society. The new generation of which I'm a part is anxious for continued change and are pleased with the current direction of the country. They have hope in the substance of things to come and are appreciative of the substance of things made present by this administration. Mr. President, as a member of this generation, they call us millennials, I consider myself tremendously fortunate to have been blessed with colleagues and friends who have assured that where I've fallen short, there is room for improvement. Where I've not recognized, there's an abundance of tutelage, and where I've been impatient, there's an atmosphere of understanding. In my consideration of the awesome responsibility that has been bestowed on me and the awareness that I would be called to sit in this chamber, I had to ponder purpose, legitimacy, and relevance. As I focus on this introduction on those three pillars, I would suspect that many of us who sit in this house have also had that contemplation. I would also presume that the purpose of many of us here today is to advocate and be a voice for those not heard and faces not seen. I could not claim to speak on behalf of the poor or the rich, but I would love to advocate on behalf of the ambitious, the hardworking, and the dedicated. On behalf of those who seek greatness, but know not how to be great. On behalf of those who seek success, but have no examples to mirror. Those who seek elevation, but have no ladder to climb. Mr. President, I grew up in a small village called Woodhall in Clarendon. We were farmers and sellers of produce. Our lives were simple, and our community bonds were strong. We did not recognize poverty, as we were all in a similar position. Those who had a TV shared it, and those who had salt shared it. It was not an embarrassment for any of us to ride the donkey to pick up load in the bush, or sit in the Mapen market and sell yam, as we were working for a cause, that of the upliftment of our families and our community. I tell this story all the time that my grandmother could not read but believed in education. And when I could not afford the late fee for student loan, she dipped in her bosom, pulled out the thread bag, and took out $2,000 and said, "Go on, my son, you will pay me back when you go to town." Mr. President, I do not see coming from poverty as something that makes me special. There are many stories of poverty in the South. Senator Braham is not here, but he has related to me his upbringing, and I'm sure there are many on the other side who have similar stories. But Mr. President, the recognition that many in our society still live as poor must cause us to constantly assess our thoughts and actions towards their improvement. There are many poor Jamaican young men and women who, because of poverty, have lost fear. They care not about life, as their life is typified by suffering. Mr. President, a man who is hungry does not fear death, as it has visited him so many times that everything else pales in comparison. Real hunger, Mr. President, is like a poisonous snake climbing up your legs and you seek rescue. Mr. President, I suggest that this government is the rescue. We, the privileged few who sit here and make laws, must recognize that the purpose of our lives is to lift all those who suffer from poverty and inequity and create a framework that they too and their children can aspire to sit in this sacred house or to have the opportunity to be great at whatever they dream. Mr. President, our purpose must be to shine a light on the possibilities and to use our efforts and voices to show those like the young men and women now in Woodall that it is possible. You can achieve through sacrifice and dedication. Mr. President, our purpose must be to define a path and encourage a better understanding of what needs to be done to further transform Jamaica so there can be more Ransford Brahams, more Currency and Morrisons, and more Andre Hortons. The young people of Jamaica, Mr. President, have seen that Jamaica can become I soon got to Skeffrey, man. I have something for him. The young people of Jamaica, Mr. President, have seen what Jamaica can become under this administration. Mr. President, the long conversations of inaction that have typified past times are not being tolerated by this generation. We are impatient for continued change. We're impatient for continued success. Mr. President, there are 1.5 million Jamaicans on social media. Mr. President, almost 50% of the Jamaican population is under 45. Mr. President, these young people are demanding different types of leaders, different types of leadership, and different types of outcomes. This government has been given the opportunity to change Jamaica. And I know we're committed to bringing that change for this new generation and generations to come. Mr. President, welcome, my friend. Mr. President, we are committed to building a new Jamaica, ensuring that all Jamaicans can realize their dreams and aspirations. While we cleave to this commitment, we must, as young people, respect the importance of process and systems. Mr. President, I speak about a new generation, but I do not seek to undermine the importance of current generations. As the leader continues to say, this party is trying to build a perfect collaboration of youth and experience. Mr. President, I have benefited from the guidance and advice of Senator Gale. I have benefited from your guidance and advice. And even, Mr. President, as I sit in this chamber and listen to persons like Senator Knight, persons like Senator Motley, even though we may not agree, I still am able to learn from their presentation. Senator Morrison spoke about the education portfolio previously, but I have a few words. I have to stand in support of the students who continue to advocate for their rights and continue to pursue their dreams of a higher education. It is for this reason, Mr. President, that I supported the students of UTEC who visited Minister Samuda months ago, seeking resolution to the vexed issues related to the funding of tertiary education. And I commend the Minister for hearing them and listening to their challenges. I also commend the UTEC Student Union President, Mr. Khalil Hutchinson, for his considered and mature advocacy on the issue. I listened to him on the radio and I was very impressed. And I was confident that we're building a cohort of young people who can take their place at the table of discussion and decision making. Mr. President, the conversation about the funding of tertiary education in Jamaica is decades old. I remember in 2001, when I was applying for student loan, we used to have to camp out down at the towers at 2 a.m. because of how the situation was then. In those days, many students suffered the indignity of having to list the appliances in their house on the form, having to say whether you had a pit latrine or a flush toilet. I'm very happy that Minister Samuda has advised me that those requirements are no longer there at the student loan. Mr. President, in those days, owning a washing machine may cause you not to get a loan because it was considered a luxury. Mr. President, we cannot afford to ignore the importance of a proper funding mechanism for tertiary education. I'm sure Senator Skeffrey will appreciate this. I consulted with the Minister of Finance and had discussions with him. And I suggested to him that now is the time for a bipartisan commission on the funding of tertiary education, Mr. President. Mr. President, a bipartisan commission that borrows on broad stakeholder consultations, including students, including politicians, including teachers, including school owners, would be tasked with coming up with a unified position on the way forward for the funding of tertiary education for the next 50 years. Mr. President, the commission is long in coming, especially in the context, Mr. President, where over 70% of our tertiary graduates leave the island after graduating. So we're subsidizing a lot of tertiary education, but what we're also doing is subsidizing other countries' employment market. We need to consider it, Mr. President. As the government has made significant investments in education, Mr. President, I have another suggestion. I was listening to the radio the other day and I heard concerns about the exit of critical care nurses from the system. There has also been concern about how many police are leaving the force every year. And there are so many other critical areas of our society where persons are either unwilling or do not wish to participate in the numbers that we as a country need. Mr. President, I am suggesting today that we give an incentive to certain critical industries in Jamaica where, for example, if you join the police force and spend 5 years, your student loan will be forgiven. I know that we would have to work out the relevant legal framework and bonding and how it would work, but I think, Mr. President, if you give young people an incentive and show them that you believe in them, they will show that they believe in the country. Mr. President, there is avenues for this with firefighters. There is avenues for this with so many other areas within the country that are short of employees, healthcare workers, where I think if you say to them, the government is going to pay off a student loan, they will stay in the civil service. Teachers too, there are many math teachers that are short. They will stay in the civil service. Mr. President, I wish to just mention in passing and commend the Early Childhood Commission for the work that they have been doing in relation to building standards in the early childhood system. The commission was formed in 2003, and it's sad to say that before 2016, not one early childhood institution was certified. Between 2017 and now, 199 were certified. Mr. President, there is now a policy directive that all government infant schools must work towards the 12 standards. That is what we're doing, Mr. President. Mr. President, there's another issue that is very dear to my heart. Another issue, and it's the issue of climate change. Mr. President, I believe that climate change is the greatest existential threat that we as a small island developing state and other small island developing states face. It is a fact, Mr. President, that a majority of Jamaicans live on the coast. A small rise in sea levels means we no longer have Portland Cottage. We no longer have Old Harbour. We no longer, as you can see what is happening in Helsha now. My colleague, Senator Samuda, will give you more details over time, and as he has done before, on the role government is playing internationally in the area of oceans, and also work being done in Jamaica to protect the environment from solid waste. My focus today is to give an update on some initiatives that this government has been doing geared towards mitigation of the impacts of climate change. Mr. President, while small island developing states contribute less than 1% of the gases that cause climate change, we are the ones which will face the greatest impact of the consequences of climate change. Jamaica, Mr. President, and it didn't start with the JLP. This climate change thing is going to affect every single Jamaican, whether you're JLP, PNP or not. So when I say these things, I don't want it to be seen as a political speech. Climate change is something that I think us as a Senate and as a Parliament, as a government and opposition can be unified in addressing. Jamaica is now leading the fight to not only build awareness on the importance of global warming, but also the need to establish funding to assist small island developing states with building climate resilience. We would have been aware of what happened in Bahamas. We would have been aware of what happened in Dominica. In 2017, we had storms which we have never contemplated happening, 2 storms in the same year. Hurricanes. Look at what is happening. And I wanted to move from the speech a bit because this is an important matter. The change, Mr. President, in our climate leads to changes in how flora and fauna function within our environment. Over the last several years, we have seen significant increases in the Aedes aegypti mosquito. I don't think in our history we have seen so many serious mosquito-borne diseases in such a short space of time. Zika, chickpea, and the one that is dengue that is happening to us now. So I think that is something that we need to contemplate. At the recent Climate Action Summit at the UN, the Prime Minister, who has been asked by the Secretary General of the United Nations, Antonio Guterres, to chair or co-chair an initiative along with the Presidents of France and Qatar to mobilize government and private sector resources to build consensus and momentum to raise $100 billion by this year, reported that they have had some success and achievements. But Mr. President, I say to you that while we as small island developing states continue to work, and Minister Johnson Smith and Senator Matthew Samuda continue to work in the corridors of diplomatic circles, there still needs to be more. The big 4 countries, which are the largest polluters, need to do more. And I believe the need for urgent reforms in the global climate change finance system is something that we all as a government, all as a parliament, can speak out on. Mr. President, the government has made significant policy decisions as it relates to the protection of our environment. I remember in 2014, where a previous administration revealed that a particular company wishes to put a port on Goat Island. We too, Mr. President, saw this amazing economic opportunity. But at the end of the day, we recognized that Goat Island is such a sensitive ecosystem in the Portland Bight protected area that we cannot trade the protection of our environment for economic benefit. And I'm happy to report, Mr. President, that this government under Andrew Holness decided that there will be no port at Goat Islands. But Mr. President, even if deciding no port at Goat Island was the only action we took, it would have been significant. But the government has decided that we will be building a wildlife sanctuary at Goat Island. And I wish to go a little further in this. Despite the fact that the Jamaican iguana is still under conservation, there has been a recognition that more needs to be done to ensure the survival of this species and other species that exist in Jamaica, such as the coney, the West Indian manatee, the American crocodile, endemic bird species, and other plants and animals. And it is under this framework that the government is going to be spending about $1.9 billion to build out a wildlife sanctuary in Goat Island, so that it's not only, yes, it's not two lizards, it's a big lizard to you. So we're building out a sanctuary, not just so that people can go and watch animals, but that we can have scientists go there and study our endemic flora and fauna. Mr. President, the other issue that I wish to speak about is the Cockpit Country. For many decades, over 2 decades, governments, JLP, PNP, environmentalists, community members have grappled with how to define the Cockpit Country. We had 2005 Paris-Leroy report. We had a report in 2008 by Simon Mitchell. We had another report by Dale Weber in 2013. And even as in 2008, there was a comment that the government should look at various alternatives placing protection on the Cockpit Country, given the public debate, and such considerations must happen sooner rather than later. Mr. President, to contextualize the Cockpit Country, remember that in 2006, there was a news story in the Environmental News Service that spoke about drilling for bauxite samples threatening the plants and animals that live in the Cockpit Country. In 2015, CEO of Jet Diana Macaulay was reported as saying that for the government to allow mining operations to begin in the Cockpit Country without any dialogue with stakeholders would cause irreparable damage to the area. In 2015, there was a demonstration here, Mr. President, with residents who live in the area demanding an end to prospecting by a particular bauxite company. Mr. President, we in 2017 in this Parliament declared the proposed Cockpit Country protected area. The consequence of this, Mr. President, is that all mining and exploration licenses have been regressed to the proposed protected area boundary. And I want to see if I can bring it up. As you can see, the blue line refers to what is now known as the proposed Cockpit Country protected area. It came out of wide consultations, looking at the various studies that were done over the years, speaking to environmentalists, speaking to hydrologists, speaking to geologists. The reality is, Mr. President, that no matter which boundary the government defines, there are still persons who would say, we want to be within the boundary. But the decision on this boundary, Mr. President, was based not on the opinions of the government, but on the scientific determination of the hydrology, geology, and also the cultural importance of the areas being covered. Currently, Mr. President, we are doing the ground truthing exercise, which will see the protecting at the end of over 74,000 hectares of land known as the Cockpit Country protected area. Mr. President, that is 7% of Jamaica's land mass, the most significant protected area in terms of you have Google, you can search for it. This is not your presentation. This is a young people thing we are talking about. Mr. President, currently the Forestry Department has completed approximately 63% of the 250 kilometers ground truthing exercise, after which specific legislation, as advised by the Attorney General, will be promulgated to ensure that there is statutory protection of this important area for not only this generation, but future generations. Mr. President, not only are we protecting the flora and fauna, but we are also dealing with environmental considerations in the area of energy. In December 2017, Mr. President, work started on the Paradise Park Solar Project, a 37 megawatt facility in Savannah-Lamar in Westmoreland, Mr. President. The cheapest energy currently being produced in the country. It is finished, the Prime Minister opened it. The cheapest energy that is being produced. And I know based on discussions taking place in the government that there is more to come. My Senate colleague, Senator Samuda, has spoken about the styrofoam ban, the plastic ban, the straw ban, and several other initiatives of solid waste. So I will allow him to continue to speak on that. But there is another area of the environment that I wish to focus on. In October 4, Senator Skeffrey, in October 4, Prime Minister Andrew Holness launched the 3 Million Trees project. He committed the government to partner with the private sector to planting over 3 million trees over the next 3 years, 1 tree for each Jamaican. In the last land use assessment that was done in Jamaica in 2013, it was discovered that Jamaica is covered by 40% forest. Mr. President, however, while Jamaica is covered with 40% forest, and the country has seen a net gain of forest of 0.41% between 1998 and 2013, the challenge is that there has been a destruction of closed broadleaf primary forests and mangroves. It is for this reason, Mr. President, that 3 million trees was decided. The project is not just about planting trees, it's also about building ecosystems, improving microclimate. We'll be planting 3 categories. We'll be replanting mangroves in Port Royal, Ocherios, and sections of Negril and other areas across the island. But there will also be urban foresting, where highways and byways will be planted with trees. Take a look at the cherry blossoms in Japan and contemplate the entire highway from White Mile all the way down to 6 Mile, populated with colorful endemic trees and the beauty that that will bring to our urban surroundings. Mr. President, contemplate the medians on Constant Spring Road and the planting of low-growing shrubs on those medians, blossoming in the morning sun, brightening the day of the commuting public as they go to work. Mr. President, while the government plans to plant 3 million trees over the next 3 years, we need the support of every Jamaican. The private sector has also jumped in and pledged so far 700,000 trees. And I think we need to show gratitude to the private sector who have made that commitment. Mr. President, as the tree planting man of the government, I could not do a presentation here without offering green shoots of prosperity to my Senate colleagues. And I ask the orderly to present both the leader of opposition business and the leader of government business. And there are more trees outside that when you finish, you can get a tree. If every Jamaican plants a tree, Mr. President, every Jamaican plants a tree, you will be having out there, we have Lignum vitae, we have Norfolk Island pine, we have Blue Maho, Spanish elm, and cypresses. I think there are 4 cypresses out there. So you won't have to, for those who get the cypress, you won't have to buy any Christmas tree in December. Yes. I'm not going to tell you the tree I brought for Andre. That will remain a secret. Mr. President, I now move on to an issue that has consumed the Senate for a long time. It's the issue of crime and violence, and it presents one of the most significant threats to our country. It has been debated here in this chamber. Almost every month we've been here talking about crime and violence.
May it please you, Mr. President, may I ask that the member's time be extended to allow him to conclude his presentation?
You have heard the question. Those in favor? Against?
Thank you, Mr. President. And thanks to leader of opposition business. Mr. President, while the exchange of views through this debate is important, the reality is that debate will not solve the crime problem. Only purposeful action will. I'm not going to go into the crime conversation because we've done it. The statistics have been presented. The opposition's perspective has been presented. Our perspective has been presented. But I have some ideas because we are a big ideas party. We are a big ideas Senate. And Senator Knight, I need your assistance to the President or Senate opposition leader of business. I need your assistance as I am not yet an attorney. So I want your assistance on this one. While the government and most Jamaicans continue the fight against crime, there is still concern that there are some who seek to wreak havoc on innocent members of our society and get a slap on the wrist. I was surprised to find out, and as I said, I'm not an attorney, so I depend on the attorneys in the House to correct me if I'm wrong. I was surprised to find out that there is no specific offense that deals with when a person is found with multiple firearms and there is evidence that this person is dealing in the weapons trade. Which one is it? Mr. President, I asked the Chamber if the law should be amended to look at a specific offense related to the trading in transportation of illegal firearms in this country. I also questioned the several news reports of persons who have been found in possession of firearms, getting light sentences and some even being fined. And I wonder if the government should consider whether we need to look at different types of possession as well as those who are caught with assault rifles should be treated similarly as different types of possession. And I read a case the other day, and I think the judge was Honourable Mrs. Justice McDonald Bishop, Paul Kennedy versus R, where she said, we cannot, however, ignore the law that the upper limit for such an offence is a maximum of life imprisonment. This reveals a clear intention of Parliament to treat possession of firearms simpliciter, just as serious as the use of them. The courts, however, may not ordinarily impose the maximum sentence of life imprisonment, but that is not to say it can never be done. Everything depends on the circumstances of a given case and the circumstances of a particular offender. In this case, the appellant, Mr. President, was seeking to appeal a 15-year sentence for possession. It was not his first offense. And should persons who are found with high-powered weapons or continually are convicted of possession or use of firearms, Mr. President, benefit from such a discretion? And I'm not seeking to fetter the courts. I know the courts are very sensitive to that conversation. But I wonder, Mr. President, whether or not us as a parliament needs to contemplate these AK-47s, these people who are transporting tens and tens of guns, whether we should give special consideration to them. The appellant did not succeed in his reduced sentence. He had to serve his 15 years. But, Mr. President, it's something that we need to consider. As I close, Mr. President, I want to touch on the issue of corruption. I wish to make an unequivocal statement. This administration has done more to aid the fight on corruption than any other administration in recent times. Mr. President, facts have no friends. And while we are all entitled to our own opinions, we are not entitled to our own facts. History will show, Mr. President, that it's the JLP administration of past that has demonstrated a stellar record in creating a framework to aid the fight against corruption in this country. I go back to the 80s with the formation of the Contractor General, with the main objective of the office to ensure that the public sector procurement and process delivers value for taxpayers' money, merit-based and free from corruption. Mr. President, the establishment of the Contractor General's office was the beginning of the building of a strong anti-corruption effort in Jamaica. This effort, Mr. President, was matured with the passing of the Integrity Commission Act in 2017. Mr. President, the new commission, Mr. President, subsumes the Office of the Contractor General, the Commission for the Prevention of Corruption, and the then Integrity of Parliament Members Commission. There was a question as to whether this commission is working. And I can report, Mr. President, that the commission is working, as last year they reported that they monitored over 500 government projects, completed 80 inquiry management reports, and conducted 69 site visits between October and April of 2019. Mr. President, this was done while the entity was forming itself, building an infrastructure. The government, Mr. President, has ensured that this entity is funded. There has been no attempt by the government to interfere with the functioning of this entity. Mr. President, we will not follow the example of previous administrations where a particular minister took the OCG to court. We will not follow the example of the current opposition leader who sought to undermine the commission by questioning whether the Auditor General should sit on the commission. A commission that he sat in Parliament and voted on, and when the commission was not seemingly to be functioning in their interest, they want to remove members of the commission or question why they should be on the commission. We're not going to follow that approach, Mr. President. Mr. President, I made an unequivocal statement, and I said facts have no friends. Mr. President, if you look at the board, it is not my opinion. It is this government that has the best Transparency International Corruption Perception Score versus any other government since they have been taking measurement. This is not my opinion. So anyone can have their opinion, but you cannot challenge the data. Mr. President, this government is not me say it, you know. It's dear PNPYO President say it. It's not me say it. It's dear PNPYO President say it. That is where I got the graph from. So, Mr. President, this government is not going to hide from accountability or transparency. It's dear PNPYO President say it. It's not me say it. That is her data. So, we are not going to hide from transparency, Mr. President. And Mr. President, even where there have been instances where questions have been raised, even before there is any call for resignations, our Prime Minister has acted. Mr. President, we are a new government. We never served 20 odd years in this parliament. We never served 20 odd years in this parliament as government. Why is it that this government has to be building so much institutional capacity to deal with accountability and transparency in the public service? I could come here today and I could read a list of 20 odd scandals valued at tens of billions of dollars And while those scandals were taking place, we never saw any significant attempts to build a proper anti-corruption framework in this country. So no one on that side can come and talk to us about corruption. The data is there. The world sees that this administration is doing better at fight against corruption than the previous one. Mr. President, I'm not going to dwell. You want to talk about, you know what, I'm not even going to do it, because today is not your day. It's not your day today. Today is young people day, and not your day today. Mr. President.
Senator Skeffrey and Senator Brown, don't worry, start the show.
There is.
Yeah, but you don't start this.
The government, Mr. President,
that's
continues.
All right. That's okay.
The government
that's
continues,
okay, but don't
Mr.
worry
President,
with the shouting across the aisle.
to make strides in doing what is right for Jamaica, in building a new Jamaica for a new generation. Mr. President, in building a new Jamaica for a new generation, we must focus on protecting the environment, reducing the impact of crime and violence while maintaining the economic gains that all Jamaicans, including those on the opposition benches, those on the government benches, have fought for. A new Jamaica must focus on the empowerment of all Jamaicans to achieve more. A Jamaica not just considering the conscript of equality, but also of equity. Mr. President, initiatives such as the Fiscal Responsibility Framework by former Minister of Finance Audley Shaw and former Prime Minister Bruce Golding laid the foundation for the current economic successes that we are seeing today. Low inflation, record employment, stable macroeconomic indicators, and improvements in the well-being of Jamaicans. The facts are there. Mr. President, there's a reason why I raised this point at the end of my speech. There's a lot of comments over the last months saying about who fixed it. And I wanted to address that.
Senator Fraser-Binns, remember you're going to speak after,
Mr. President,
Senator
I remember
Brown,
when I was a journalist.
All right.
I remember when I was a journalist, Mr. President. There was conversation in this country about fiscal responsibility. I remember Mutty Perkins on ear, and Mutty Perkins had a song that he sang. There's a hole in the budget, dear PJ, there's a hole in the budget. We spent decades, Mr. President, with irresponsible economic policies. We spent decades borrowing high interest rate money on the international market. And when Audley Shaw said to them, you can get 3% money from the multilaterals, they scoffed at him and laughed at him. The Fiscal Responsibility Framework, Mr. President, as you can see on that, was started by a JLP administration, by Audley Shaw, by Bruce Golding. So those who lay claim and try to take paternity of the foundation of the recovery, you know why? When you guys signed a wage agreement without any money to pay for it, and the police took the government to court and forced us to pay for that, that is what impacted the IMF agreement. So don't come here with your hypocrisy. Mr. President, there seems to be an attempt to wipe the facts from the history books. We found the single-digit loan. And even after they claimed challenges with the IMF, multilaterals were still lending us money in 2011, where the IDB gave us a large loan. So how then can they say we were pariahs of the international financial community? You say it. Mr. President, as I close, this is a government. It's building a new Jamaica, This government, Mr. President, is building a new Jamaica for future generations. Our achievements, Mr. President, make us a government that young people can believe in. Jamaicans, Mr. President, can believe in the record housing starts of over 30,000 since 2016. Jamaicans, Mr. President, can believe in record investments in national security since 2016. Jamaicans can believe in significant changes in environmental protection that has led to the benefit of the climate and the microclimate and all Jamaicans, Mr. President. Mr. President, Jamaicans can believe in the record number of jobs created by this administration since 2016. They can believe in the record number of roads built since 2016. Mr. President, over 400 roads repaired and built since this government took office. It has never been done before. Mr. President, the new generation believes in the Constant Spring Road. They believe in Hagley Park Road. They believe in the 3 Mile Overpass, the Chesterfield Bridge, and Junction getting water for the first time in 20 years. Mr. President, this is what a prosperity government looks like. Mr. President, this is what a government working for the people looks like. Mr. President, this is what a government building Jamaica for all Jamaicans look like. And I echo the sentiment of my colleague. After all these achievements, the public is saying one good term deserves another. Thank you, Mr. President.
Well done.
Furthermore, I didn't take any offense when you said this was a young people time, because I thought you meant young at heart as well, don't it? Thank you, Senator Morgan. Senator Fraser-Binns. And I expect the same courtesies extended to Senator Morgan, that they will be extended to Senator Fraser-Binns, and that she will be allowed to be heard in silence.
Mr. President, thank you. And I am particularly pleased to hear the last part, that I will be allowed to make my presentation in silence. Yes. Save for the many applause that I know I'll be receiving from both sides. You like it? It's hot, right? Progress. Mr. President, I stand to make my contribution to this state of the nation. In fact, when I was preparing this, I said, wow, 1 year come and gone so fast. Because I do recall last year when I was doing my presentation, and I remember expressed that I was in a yellow dress, very well pregnant, and I wondered if I could have stood up for the 30 minutes. And Jonathan is actually 10 months, so 1 year really come and gone so fast. But Mr. President, I really want to thank you for your support and for your balanced approach in how you have presided over this chamber. And I want to, yes, you see, I don't find Mr. President calling me. In fact, I find most times he comes to defend me, right, Mr. President, and protect me. So very balanced. And like Senator Scott Motley, I too look forward to my water on my Fridays. And in fact, I have received this morning's water. I want to thank the Honourable Portia Simpson Miller, former Prime Minister, because my appointment to the Senate in 2013 really started with her, and she continued in 2016. And I'm ever so grateful for the confidence that she reposed in me, and which was continued by my party leader, my future Prime Minister, Peter not only inspires, but who is without any doubt one that manages, one that administers, one that lives a life of integrity, unquestionable integrity. And I do believe that his love and devotion for this country, when the books are written, he will be seen as one of the greats. I want to thank my family on this side, under the leadership of what we continue to call Mother Hen Donna Scott Motley. After the mother, I am the only female on this side. And I can tell you that all my brothers look out for me, they take care of me, and they make sure that my family and I are always taken care of. My colleagues, and I want to say friends on the other side, because over the last 4 years, there are some persons who moved from just colleagues to friends. And, but Parnell, we're coming from far. And I thank you as well. Senator Charles Jr., I know that at some appropriate time, things will be said about you. But you know on a very personal level how much I admire you. And I am wishing you the best for the time being. But I look forward to you rejoining us in this Senate in short order. I want to, that's why he's over there now, we'll be over here the next time. To my own family, the men in my life, Jeffrey, Nathan, and Jonathan. Yes, 3 men. They are in every way my life, my love, my completion. I want to thank my task force, which continue to provide me with all the information I need so that I can speak from an informed position. And today I want to thank and single out the chairman of the opposition's task force on the Land Ownership Commission, Mr. Norman Minot, who is here with us, and thank him for his continued support. Mr. Minot, please stand. Mr. Minot has done a lot for Jamaica in terms of his contribution to the legal fraternity and his contribution to our party. And by no means least to God for sparing us, for loving us, and continue to show his mercy to us. Mr. President, as I consider my presentation as State of the Nation, there are many things that I could have written on. There are many things I could have said. We could talk about the crime, we could talk about the unemployment, we could talk about the underemployment, the number of persons who have decided that they just can't bother because they can't find a job, and the fact that for a majority of Jamaicans, prosperity is just not being realized. But I will not speak to them, because there's a thing in law called res ispa loquitur. And it says the thing speaks for itself. The very fact that almost every month or every 3 months we're here talking about the state of emergency speaks for itself. I don't think I need to speak on those. So what I want to talk about are issues that often we do not focus on, but are so very important to who we are as a country and for the sustenance of our people. But before I go into those matters, there is one thing I must say coming from my speech last year. You may recall, sir, that I spoke about the challenges that women, particularly maternity, women having children, face with insurance. I am so very pleased that 1 year later, at least one company has sought to address this issue. And I have no brief, more than what I've Googled. But with its total woman plan, Sagicor Life now seeks to cater for today's women and has designed different packages for women at different stages of their lives, covering not only the main critical illnesses that affect everyone, but especially covers uniquely female illnesses or condition and maternity. And I want to congratulate them. I believe this is a step in the right direction, and it gives effect to the vision of the Honourable R. Danny Williams, OG. I know Senator Webley that Canopy will be following shortly because they believe in the power and the specialness and the uniqueness of our women. And I hope that others will follow soon. Now to my presentation. Mr. President, it is no secret that land and access to land and the affordability is a matter which touch and concern every Jamaican. And it is for this reason why successive People's National Party-led administration have sought to promulgate various legislation and policies to put land in the hands of the landless. Whether it was site and service, land lease, amendment to the Registration of Titles Act to give provision for adverse possession, or it was the passage of landmark legislation such as the Special Provisions Act, which established LAMP, we have always been at the forefront of policies to transform the lives of ordinary Jamaicans. And it is for that reason, sir, that when this government announced the merger of LAMP and the National Land Agency, that we had made some constructive criticisms because we genuinely had concerns, because we knew that it was a marriage that was just wholly incompatible. Yet, the merger went ahead. So fast forward now to 2020 and where we are. Let me tell you where we are. Almost 95% of the staff have been sent home from LAMP, and new persons have been taken on. The challenge with this is that those persons who have been sent home are persons who have been working with LAMP for many years, would have derived special training and understanding in how LAMP matters are dealt with, how land matters are dealt with. And we now have a new staff that have very little knowledge in how to deal with these matters. In fact, I can tell you that almost all the paralegals who were laid off at LAMP have been taken up by private practitioners because they know and they value the expertise of these persons. The resources required to give effect to the much touted objective of 14,000 titles have not been provided. Our investigation revealed that LAMP still struggles with the resources it wants. And as if that is not bad enough, during the previous LAMP, a person was stationed at the titles office that would ensure that the matters are dealt with expeditiously and expertly. No such person exists. And so what is now happening is that there's a bottleneck of matters at the titles office, otherwise a part of National Land Agency, which never happened under LAMP as it existed. And so, Mr. President, I am asking for very speedy intervention in this marriage, a marriage which, I repeat, is incompatible. Since its establishment in 2000, LAMP has been the answer to a lot of Jamaicans' problems. One, because of cost. A lot of people simply could not afford to get a title to land or to deal with dead left property because they never had the money. LAMP provided that means. Now, they're saying, and we have spoken to some of them, that things are going extremely slowly. The cost is still the same. And I say that because one of the things that the government said with the merger was that it would help to bring down the cost of titling. To our certain knowledge, that has not happened. Regrettably, Mr. President, LAMP or the merger has not changed for the better what we know as LAMP. In fact, it has made it even more challenging. And so I call on the government, the minister, to provide an update on the merger. Let us know how it is working, what are the challenges, what are the successes, and the plans to make it operate optimally. Another issue relating to the merger was that there were a list of proposed amendments that would give effect to the Registration of Titles Act. Mr. President, a lot of excitement was around these amendments. And note that these amendments were not new amendments because they started from before. In fact, they were concretized under former Minister Robert Bobby Pickersgill. After 1 year, we still do not know where we are with those proposals. And again, I call on the minister to make a statement so we are aware as to what is happening with LAMP and the proposal to the Registration of Titles Act. Mr. President, I want to look at the issue of informal settlements. It is not a secret that the country has a significant number of informal settlements. In fact, studies done show that approximately 75% of informal settlement or squatting was taking place on government land, and 16% on private lands, and the remainder is uncertain. Of these, 82% were located in the Kingston and St. Andrew urban center, followed by St. Catherine. And since those studies in the mid-2000s, the situation has worsened. The time has come for us as a country to deal with the issue of informal settlements in a real way. But I have to address something that came to my attention this week. I was a part of a meeting, and in that meeting, I was reminded that a majority of the persons who live in informal settlements did not take it by force. They were let on either with permission by the church or the owner or somebody purporting to be the owner, or they went on because they had nowhere else to live. They did not go on there because they were being malicious or because they were violent or they do not care what the law says. No. Most of these people, when you talk to them, are simply trying to find somewhere to lay their heads. The question then is, why must we treat them in such a way? Why do we treat them in such a derogatory way? Why do we treat them in a way that is so offensive? The very use of the word squatter is derogatory. And I'm saying, Mr. President, that perhaps as at today, the 7th of February, 2020, we could start by using a word that gives some pride of place. A word, perhaps informal settlers. But the term squatters in and of itself is derogatory and demeaning to these persons. As a government, we have a duty to ensure that our actions and our utterances do not further discriminate, separate, or in some cases, impoverish some of these persons in informal settlements. At that meeting this week, I met with members of the community between 7 to 10 miles in Dallas, East Rural St. Andrew. That's in Bull Bay, East Rural St. Andrew. And it is a community where the highway leading to St. Thomas is going to pass through. Some of these persons have been living there for 40 years. Some of them were born there. Others went on with permission of the church. But at no time did anyone take possession with violence. Yet there has been no meaningful engagements with these persons on the use of the land that they call their home. They said to me they feel dejected, despondent, and some of them desperate. In fact, I recall, and Norman was at the meeting, one lady said to me, I have a grandchild that was born 2 weeks ago, and I have to think about my grandchild. What is going to happen to my grandchild? Where is my grandchild going to live? You felt the anguish, you felt the pain, you saw the tears in these persons' eyes. When you listen to these stories, Mr. President, we must ask ourselves, what kind of message are we sending to these persons? Are we saying to them that because you have no title, you are less significant? This kind of treatment, Mr. President, is happening too often. We see it in the expansion of the Junction Road, and we're seeing it again in Bull Bay. I am making a plea for the residents. Consult them, engage them, come to the table with options. Let them feel that they are valuable stakeholders. We must recognize and accept that these persons have invested in these properties, and some regard must be shown for this. We can't just go in and bulldoze at them or send in some people from outside to start digging road or marking road and marking thing. No, that is not how it is done. Mr. President, we want development, but it cannot be at the risk of our citizenry. You know, we have spoken over the last 2.5 years a lot about the states of emergency. We have spoken about the reasons and the driving factors. But let me tell you something, Mr. President. If we continue to treat our persons, our citizens with this kind of scant regard, then this is going to be a driving factor. This is going to be one of the things that is going to cause crime and violence in our community. How do you justify to someone when you pull a roof from over his head or over his child's head? It is not enough to say, we relocate you or we'll pay you something. These kind of callous action is enough, Mr. President, to tempt even a born again to do things that they have to seek forgiveness for. Mr. President, it is not enough to build roads through communities. We have to build roads. We must. But it can't be that it's at the expense of our communities. We must build roads hand in hand with building communities. Otherwise, we will have roads, but we'll have no community persons to use them. Mr. President, as we build roads, let us build communities and livelihoods. It is an investment that is worth making. Mr. President, like land ownership, housing is a good that most, in fact, everyone seek it. Senator Longmore will tell you about Maslow's hierarchy of needs, and she knows that the need for shelter is one of them. And so it is important that as a country, that as leaders, that as a government, we see the provision of adequate and affordable housing as a necessity. There is, in fact, a very clear link between adequate housing and one's well-being. Over the past decade, both administrations have sought to work with the National Housing Trust to reduce interest rates and to increase mortgage proceeds. Yet there remains much more to be done to address the issue of housing shortage in our country. Within the Kingston and St. Andrew area, especially St. Andrew, there has been a proliferation of housing, especially apartments. But despite these very visible increase, there is still a large percentage of our people, particularly our young professionals, who simply cannot afford it. 2 bedrooms apartment in Kingston 6, Kingston 8 is costing anywhere between $20 to $30 million. This is not something that somebody leaving the university, whatever university, can afford offhand. The cost of housing, Mr. President, is gradually putting housing out of the hands of those who need it most. And it is something that we must do to arrest the problem. It has been said that one of the reasons for the high cost of housing is the cost of development. And perhaps it is so. And it is for this reason that I have some recommendations for you, Minister. One, we need to relook at the type of material we use in making our homes. These materials should be cost effective, they should be able to withstand all types of natural disaster, and they should be energy efficient. There is no reason why every single house that we put up have to be black and steel. There is the use of bamboo. We need to start exploring that and other options. We have to be more proactive in how we treat with the US dollar. And you may say to me, but what does this have to do? And I say to you, let me share with you what it has to do, because it has to do with everything. I am doing a sale. And the sale started, I think, at maybe 23 million in the Kingston 6 area. We have not even signed agreement. I get a letter from the vendor's attorney to say that they have to increase the sale price by 900,000 for the sole reason, Mr. President, that the US dollar, when they commenced negotiation, was 123, and the point of ready to sign was 135.
As the effect of poor government.
That was the sole reason provided by the attorney. And he's an attorney of good standing, so I have no reason to doubt his integrity. This is the reality, Mr. President. And so when I say that we need to deal in a proactive way with how we treat with the US dollar, this is what I'm talking about. We have to find a way to balance our intervention in the market in a way that it does not impact negatively on people's lives.
Has no answer.
Mr. President, we must also encourage the development of mixed-use development and towns with all the requisite amenities, such as schools, police station, commercial enterprises, instead of just apartments and townhouses only. Because what you find happening, Mr. President, is that you have all these apartments and townhouses in one section of Kingston, or one section of St. Catherine, or one section of the Clarendon nearest to St. Catherine, but everybody have to still travel into Kingston for employment or for school, because some of the best schools are in Kingston, because their jobs are in Kingston. And so what we have to do is we have to start by having mixed development, so people don't have to leave their parish to traverse into Kingston for employment, like Manchester. Mr. President, I also recommend that we need to look at an Operation Pride concept to develop lands owned by the government. The truth is that, whereas there are some lessons that we must learn from the execution of Operation Pride, the undisputed undisputed fact, Senator Skeffrey, is that the concept of Operation Pride was able to put land in the hands of many Jamaicans who could not have afforded it otherwise.
Teachers, nurses, police.
And let me say that we talk about Operation Pride, people like to think about probably Callaloo Mules. But no, Operation Pride was Long Mountain, where houses were sold for $4 million then, and today they're valued at how much, Senator Morris? About $20 million? Operation Pride is in Pans of Karachi. Operation Pride is in Melrose News. Your doctors, your policemen, your postmistress, your teachers, your civil servants, and senators are all beneficiaries of Operation Pride. So let us not throw the baby away with the bathwater. Let us take the concept and what it was designed for and see how we can use it. Because at the end of the day, I do believe that, like me, you on that side want a Jamaica that works for all. And Mr. President, my final recommendation on this is that we need to complete a study and an evaluation on the housing demands and needs of Jamaican households and to invest in the appropriate mechanism to provide adequate shelter for all. If we can commit to doing this, then, Senator Longmore, we would have gone a far way in achieving one of Maslow's hierarchy of needs. As I continue to speak on housing, much has been said about building new houses and what a competitive government. Because the race is on to see if this government can outdo the PNP government on its housing success. The truth is that we have...
You don't wake up yet. We are in your mind.
The truth is that in our quest to outdo, we haven't really stopped. It's not 30
Time
minutes
for
yet.
the speakers pass.
It's 30 minutes.
2 more hours. 2 more hours.
Mr. President, the Speaker's time having expired, we ask that she be permitted sufficient time to complete her presentation.
2 more hours.
Question is the time for the speakers pass. Can we give her sufficient time to conclude her presentation? Those in favor? Aye. Those against? The ayes have it. Continue.
Thank you.
Only break for sunset.
Mr. President, the truth is that we have not stopped to really allow our creative juices to be unearthed in looking for housing solution. There has been this focus on what we call, on building new houses. It is called, I'm told the technical term is greenfield housing. But focus must also be placed on brownfield housing. How do we use what we have, refit them, retrofit them, modernize them, improve upon them, so that anybody, any senator in here, any lawyer, doctor, Indian chief would want to live there. And I'm saying that if we do this, then we're doing two things. We are meeting the people where they are. We are reducing the cost of housing. And we will be doing a service to the renewal of some of our communities. Mr. President, I said before, Not everybody can afford a 20 million house in Kingston 6 or Kingston 8. But if we spend and invest the resources wisely, then we can truly provide affordable houses. What is required is a balancing between greenfield and brownfield housing development solutions so that we cater for all Jamaicans, wherever they are, whoever they are. And Mr. President, I commit to you and I commit to all Jamaicans that when the next election is called and Peter David Phillips becomes Prime Minister, we Senator Charles, and Senator Charles, because of who you are, I promise you that I will engage you because you possess the expertise and the balance that we need. We sure that we not only put land in the hands of the landless, but we will make sure that Jamaicans have houses and affordable, climate-resistant, solar, energy-efficient housing with water. And Senator Charles, I know this is your area now, so I'm taking time. I'm taking time because I truly, truly like you. So I'm taking time. Housing is his, housing and water. Mr. President, let me look at the issue of high-rise. Like me, many Jamaicans will not forget the 28th of January 2020. And for me, it wasn't just because it was Jeffrey's birthday, but for all of us, it was a wake-up call with a 7.7 earthquake. I don't know if it's good or it's bad. I was either on my way to or from the airport, so I did not feel it. But when I got the call, my first thought is Jonathan and Nathan. It has forced me to think of many things, many, many things. But one of the things that came to my mind was what would happen in Kingston, especially Kingston 6, Kingston 7, and Kingston 8. And you wonder why I single out these areas? Because, as you know, Minister, these are the highest concentration of high-rise buildings. And the fault lines, yes, that's right, Senator Longmore. And because of that, I am forced to ask myself some questions, which I now ask of all of us, and indeed of the government. Firstly, are we really building resilient homes? What of the quality of the materials that we're using? Are the systems in place to evaluate and assess proposals for development in a robust way to ensure the integrity of these new high-rise buildings? Are there too many high-rise buildings being concentrated in certain areas? And how do we address that problem going forward? What is the impact on the country, on lives, if these buildings were to be? These are questions that affect every single Jamaican. Mr. President, I use my presentation to ask the government to consider the establishment, if it has not already done so, of a multi-agency bipartisan group to oversee the continued assessment of existing buildings to ensure that they are disaster ready. I further ask the Minister of Local Government and the municipal corporations to leave no stones unturned in enforcing the Building Act. If we fail, Mr. President, to do this, the result is going to be too much for our country. Mr. President, the issue of high-rise buildings also has a direct impact on our infrastructures. Our drainage systems, our water supply, our roads, transportation, and commerce. I know that the development plan for KSA, Kingston and St. Andrew, have been revised and was circulated sometime, I think, last year. And it is good. But we must ask ourselves, have we gone far enough? Do we need to go beyond the planned? Have we engaged in a real and sufficient ways our spatial planners? Have we reviewed our existing legislation to see if other changes are required to ensure that we move with the changing tide in our environment? Mr. President, what comes to mind readily is the Town and Country Planning Act, which lacks and cries out for review. I don't think that act has been reviewed in probably 50 years. The time come for us to review it. Mr. President, if we do not put planning at the heart of all these developments, not only will we make ourselves susceptible to devastating effects of natural disasters, but we are creating some man-made disasters too. And so I ask Minister that we move post-haste to see how we can come together across the aisle with civil society to put a team together to constantly, to vigilantly work to protect and to preserve Jamaica. Because unlike a hurricane, as you know, there really isn't much you can do with an earthquake, you know. There's not much we can do with an earthquake, but be prepared. We have to go beyond the message, and I'll talk about it later, about just going under the table or standing by the doorpost and holding on. We have to do a little bit more than that. Mr. President, I now turn to the issue of Airbnb. There is no doubt that Airbnb sector is the largest hotel in the world. And interestingly, it is a hotel that has no walls. And in Jamaica, Airbnb has really taken off. And I'm very happy for that. It has done a lot to transform the economic health of many Jamaicans. I mean, in a constituency which I'm affiliated, I can tell you that notwithstanding where it is, people going down there because of the heritage that is associated with it, because of Airbnb. In South St. Andrew, sir. South St. Andrew. Yes, man. Yes. Right? Because of the rich heritage. So it's a good thing. It's a good thing. It's not specific. Through Airbnb, a lot of Jamaicans have earned an income. They have become self-reliant, they have become independent, and they can see an independent future. And so we have to encourage it. But there are some genuine concerns that we can't hide from. There are some real issues that we're going to have to deal with in a very balanced way. What are some of the concerns? We have to consider, how does Airbnb impact our communities, our lifestyles, our culture? You see, I live in one of those areas where there's an Airbnb. Mr. President, I can't tell you the number of time I have to go to the security and cuss. In good Anglican way, of course. In good Anglican way. You know, I have to say communion on Sundays. But I do protest because the smell of the weed with 2 young children, it angers me. I mean, it really angers me. Yes, it does. And I'm not against a person expressing themselves that way. But with my 2 young children, I'm particularly unnerved. Right? And then when you hear of some of the stories about some of these persons who come and inhabit the accommodation, you cringe. So we have to think about how it impacts lifestyle, how it impacts community culture, how it impacts security issues. We must consider, Minister, what is the best mechanism to put in place to regularize Airbnb. What effect, if any at all, does Airbnb have on our real estate industry? Specifically, we must examine whether there is a relationship between Airbnb and the patterns of investment in land and real estate. Is that one of the reasons why you're finding more apartments than standalones? This is something to discuss. Is it because Airbnb...
Sorry, 1 minute. Senator Charles?
He did.
It was done?
Yes.
Sorry. I get some wrong
I'm
information
almost there.
from
2 more pages.
all
2
3.
more. 2 more. no. 2 more.
Senator Fraser-Binns, I apologize.
That's okay, Mr. President.
He's enjoying your speech so much that he wants Well done, Mr. President.
We have to consider whether this is one of the driving factors in terms of the cost of real estate. What is the likely effect it will have on the housing market? And what segment of the housing market is likely to be more impacted? These are questions, Mr. President, that we have to grapple with. And I don't think we can delay. I know that there has been a lot of courteous dance around the issue, and I can understand. But I believe that we must treat with it. And in treating with it, I am not saying that you must tax it, because I think perhaps the resistance or the hesitation in dealing with it is because people feel that regularizing it means you're going to tax it. I'm not saying we should. I'm urging the government, though, to quickly put a task force, link with it RAJ, the Real Estate Association of Jamaica, the different stakeholders, strata. Let us sit down and deal with this issue of Airbnb once and for all in a holistic way and not limited to the issue of taxation. Mr. President, I mentioned earlier the January 28th earthquake. And I crave your indulgence, but I must revisit it. There's a little information that was circulating after the earthquake that was not about the fact that we went to Port Royal and there was an earthquake. But it was a tell reminder that in 1962, the Port Royal earthquake was 7.0. 1916, sorry. Yeah. Yes. And that led to it called the Sunken City. That is why I rely on you so much, Mr. President. In 1907, with the Kingston earthquake, it was 6.5, and it devastated the city. 1,000 persons died. In 2010, the Haiti earthquake was 7.5, and Haiti was completely devastated. We saw the photos. I think some of us cried with Haiti. And the 2020 earthquake in Jamaica was 7.7. Mr. President, we just have to thank God for His mercy. We have to just reinforce that Jamaica is a blessed country. But I asked my colleagues, where were you when you either felt or heard about the earthquake? How prepared, no, seriously, how prepared were you? For me, Mr. President, what I did, I told you before I wasn't home, but for me it was a good reminder. So I went home and I said to Miss Anne, what do you do with it when an earthquake comes? Where do we meet? And I reminded her of the conversation that we had earlier about our meeting place, about what to do when an earthquake comes. Have you had that kind of conversation with your family? Are we prepared in case there's a real big and destructive earthquake? You know, when I heard about the tsunami that was likely to happen, or the possibility of the tsunami, my first thought was, I wonder if my apartment is high enough. Seriously, that was my thought. And then I thought about the persons living closer to the sea. And I know that they could not withstand it. And again, we ask ourselves, are we prepared as a country to deal with this? It has to be a wake-up call for all of us. Minister, we can't plan for it, but are there some things that the government can do with civil society to prepare us beyond just the advertisement about holding on to the table? Are there some sites that we can identify? You know, when we're having a hurricane, for example, we know that these are the shelters, and everybody knows where the shelters are, right? But in an earthquake, if we have done, I've never seen it. So I'm putting it to you. In an earthquake, have we identified places that persons, knowing that things you can't control where it's devastating an earthquake, but have we identified safe places that persons can go? You know? No, but I'm saying that these are things that we need to do. Do we have constant drills in our hospitals with our first responders as to what to do? You know? No, I'm just saying, perhaps you're doing it, but I'm just throwing it up for a national discussion. Have we in our hospitals, for example, Dr. Longmore, at Westwood, I went to Westwood, and everybody knows that by now. And we used to have fire drills at Westwood. Nobody knows when a fire drill is going to happen. You just hear the bell. You just hear the bell ringing, and when you hear the bell ringing for more than 30 seconds, you know, fire drill. If you're in your night clothes, you know you have to go on the quad. Wherever you are, you know there's a stand. Yes, man. Yes, but it's good. It's good. So that's the point I'm making. Have we had that kind? No. Have we had that kind of drill, that kind of rehearsal in our hospitals with our policemen, with our firefighters, with our first responders? Have we had it? And I'm saying if we haven't, maybe this is the time to start. Mr. President, we cannot wait until January. And I've been to ODPEM, where they've had their earthquake awareness month. But we can't wait until January alone. Because the truth is that last year, February right back to December, we had earthquake, we had tremors. Some of them we feel, some of them we did not feel. So it is not unique to, it's not limited to January. We can't wait until January to have an earthquake awareness program. We have to have an ongoing national campaign in our media, in social media, all types of media, so people become aware. It becomes second nature to them what to do. And all Jamaicans, outside of what the government has to do, all Jamaicans must take personal safety, personal authority over their safety. Because, as Senator Longmore said, we're on the major fault lines. You need to have your medication at hand. at hand, sorry. I mentioned the family drills and the family meetings. You need to agree, Jamaicans, to meet in places. You need to have at least 2 or 3 meeting places in order. So this is the first part. This is the first place to meet. But if for some reason you can't meet there, let's go to point B. We meet at point B or point C. That's what we need to do in our families. And community preparedness, absolutely. You need to pack. I have a bag at home, my emergency bag. I said, Miss, and if anything come, if as best as you can, grab this bag and run with my children. Yes? We need to have an emergency bag with some food and some clothes and some water. And we let our family members know that. And we need to be our brother's keeper. We need to know what's happening next door. Where I live, I know there's a baby next door, so if anything, I have to check on Riri. We need to know that. We need to be a brother's keeper and constantly pray that our next one don't come. Mr. President, as we reflect on the state of our nation, it is evident that we cannot continue to do things as we have been doing. Not just politically, but socially we have to change. Economically, we have to change. Spiritually, we have to change. We must recommit ourselves, our country, to the Lord. And I like to say, I like to pray in the parliament, you see. We must ask that He will bring us men of integrity and faith. We must be our brothers' keepers. Keeper. We must love our neighbors as ourselves. Because, Mr. President, it is the only way that we can truly be able to enjoy this year Jamaica land we love. Thank you, Mr. President. Thank you, my colleagues.
Thank you, Senator Fraser-Binns.
Teach and beat.
Thank you, Senator Fraser-Binns. Senator Knight, I understand you want to make a contribution.
Yes, thank you. President, I rise to make a reasonably brief presentation in State of the Nation debate. And before I do so, I want to express my words of congratulations to you on how you have grown into the job.
In size, he's now fitted in the chair.
And I must say that there is a feeling of comfort when you are presiding, and whenever you vacate the chair, we long for your return. I owe my presence here to the decision of the leader of the People's National Party, Dr. Peter David Phillips, and I express my gratitude to him for reappointing me as a member of this august body. To my colleagues on both sides, there are occasions when things have been rough, things have been smooth, but there's a certain beauty that calms my inner self when times are rough. it is our ability to make up as if nothing at all had happened, and we move on. And we do so because we understand our roles, and we are also united in ensuring that we give our best for the development of the country. There are times when we have a difference of opinion as to the road on which we should travel to get to the destination, and that is understandable. But we do have an objective as to where our efforts should be directed, and we understand that we are to really concentrate on uplifting those members of the society who have been marginalized by giving them opportunity. And so there is a sense of unity of purpose. I want to thank my family, and who they have stood by me over many, many years now. I've been in the political arena now for, this is the 31st year. I must confess that when I started 31 years ago, I never envisaged that I would have lasted in that arena for such a prolonged period of time. And you know, it has been a privilege for me to serve. I am trying to give back some of what I received from my country, Jamaica. And quite frankly, it would take another 31 years to even make any significant dent in that arena. I want to thank the members of staff who have been so helpful to all of us, so cooperative. And we have to recognize that there are times when they work under difficult circumstances, but they always produce the best they can in the particular circumstances. And so congratulations. And then there's a group on Duke Street that I must thank also. And those are the persons who work at Night Junior and Samuel's, the staff there. They look forward oftentimes to my coming back to the office after a sitting and then telling them what transpired further up Duke Street, which is here. What I tell them sometimes does not necessarily accord with how the news people report it. But you do understand that one should speak of one's self in glowing terms where it is necessary, and project at all times one's best image. It is not necessarily captured in the press And when it is not captured, I don't quarrel. I don't quarrel at all. Because then I just take it that they are reporting reality, whilst I was not. President, there are a couple of things I want to speak to. And all my friends. I see one friend here in the audience. I greet you well, Norman. And all my friends who have been supportive of me over the years. And I must say a special word about the senators with whom I sit in this part of the chamber. President, if I have a dull day, if I have a difficult day, the moment I see anyone or all of them, I'm of a different disposition. And of course, these days, one has to be the member of the WhatsApp group. And we have a WhatsApp group. And what a joyful experience. It is to always read that which is posted. And as I said, I have 2 years. I'm sorry the leader of government business is not here, because I propose to start with an area that relates to her ministerial responsibility.
Are you getting into the meat of your presentation now?
Yes.
So the record can show that that is the longest run-up in the history of
Be not surprised. When I was at Woolworth, I opened the bowling for Woolworth, and I had a reasonable long run-up because I lifted the ball of a good length, and it would swing in and out. The slip fielders and the wicket keeper had to be alert. On this occasion, I'm not going to swing in a ball. May I ask you, what is a wide? I want to start a bit. In the news recently, I've seen dispatches dealing with the relationship between Jamaica and China. And I thought I would, as one who had the responsibility to build on that relationship, to say a little about it. Jamaica, for a long time now, recognized and followed what we call the One China policy. And we still do. That was under the leadership of then Prime Minister Michael Manley. And subsequent Prime Ministers have recognized the One China policy. Especially in these days, countries have to be quite aware of what is happening in the international arena. and in being so aware, must make a determination as to which countries they're comfortable dealing with, especially in the area of trade. Dealing with a country, establishing, strengthening, and growing trade relations does not mean that the countries have the same approach to the political arrangements. There has to be a separation between political arrangements and trade relations. And nowhere is that more evident than the relationship between the United States of America and China. The political arrangements are different, and never, it is my belief, shall the twain meet. We have also a special relationship with one of our neighbors, Cuba. Cuba has a communist regime, but that does not affect our trading relations and shouldn't. There seems to be some disquiet in certain quarters, and the disquiet seems to arise because there is a fear that Jamaica is going to somehow be influenced in the political arena by China. Well, we haven't been, we weren't influenced by Cuba, but they are our neighbors, and the relationship is a solid one and should remain so. We have been dealing with China on the trade level for several years now, and there has been no political intervention, and it is not expected that there will be, and therefore there is no need on the part of any other ally of ours to feel that we are going to be influenced and our political arrangements will be dismantled to accommodate a new one. That arrangement, which is feared by some, is alien to us. But it has to be understood, and in the clearest terms, that national interest, vested interest, plays a role in trade relations. And what Jamaica wants to do is to expand the trade arena. The United States of America, our neighbor to the north, will always, in my view, be our largest trading partner. And it happens that our political arrangements coincide. They coincide. And we find no reason to change our political arrangements, as the United States does not find a reason to change their political arrangements as they strengthen their trade relationship with China. We are a young, but in some senses a mature democracy. We are. we are well recognized in the international arena, and therefore some thought must be given by those who feel some sense of disquiet to the maturity that we have shown on the international scene. And therefore, what we are doing now is in the interest of our people, because our country seeks development. And if the ties between us are economic, then what is the problem? What's the problem? What we have to ensure is that whichever government has to negotiate with a foreign country, the government understands that it must be doing so to get the best out of that deal for our country. And we must look at long-term consequences. For example, if we are getting indebted to any foreign state, we must look at that. That is a matter for the political directorate and a matter for the administrative staff in the political directorate. I express great confidence in those civil servants who are attached to the Ministry of Foreign Affairs and Foreign Trade. I have confidence in their ability to understand Jamaica's interests and to pursue Jamaica's interests. I also have great comfort in the way in which the civil service staff at the Ministry of Finance and Public Service, how they operate. And I have no fear whatsoever that they will sanction any arrangement between our two countries which will be inimical to our welfare. I want the Minister of Foreign Affairs and Foreign Trade to come out and speak in a pellucid way that it is understood internationally where we stand. And what we stand for. Yes, sir. And those allies who need to be reassured that the diplomatic channels are used for that reassurance. But I think the debate, I think what has arisen in recent days, the dialogue, the public dialogue, it causes me some discomfiture, causes me personally some discomfiture, and has the capacity to create alienation and a gulf where none exists or ought to exist. And it could also project a view that Jamaica's foreign policy both at the political level and at the trade level, that it is being either dictated by some foreign power or manipulated by some foreign power. And I want some clarity on that. I want the Minister of Foreign Trade, Foreign Affairs and Foreign Trade to come into this Senate, this Parliament, and speak in a very clear way, without fear, and put our position out so that it can be clearly understood. We have to understand that we are a member of a group called CARICOM. We are working assiduously at creating a single market and a single economy. So we are getting closer and closer, and they must understand where we are in that process. Now, I just want to say something briefly on CARICOM Jamaica foreign policy. We don't harmonize our foreign policy. We don't. Each CARICOM country is free within the Treaty of Chaguaramas to develop its own foreign policy. And we do. But what we try to do is, as a bloc, we coordinate our foreign policy. Coordinate it. So that we attempt not to be going out there speaking through different sides of our mouths on the same issue. So we try to coordinate it. We don't have one consistent foreign policy amongst the 15 of us. But as a bloc, on the international arena, we are seen as a group of countries who work together, and we are courted as a group in this hemisphere of 34 countries in the OAS. Jamaica, CARICOM accounts for 15. 15 votes in the OAS. So that's a voice. If we are united in our position, we are courted. And what I want us and the foreign minister to make very clear so I can understand is whether we still understand the unity and the power that we have in this hemisphere arising out of the coordinated approach. And so, I remember well when the Chilean Jose Insulza, when Insulza was seeking to become the Secretary General of the OAS, and Luis Derbez from Mexico was also seeking to be. And from, I think it was Guatemala, I can't remember. What happened was that CARICOM took a coordinated position, and we supported Insulza because we felt that in supporting Insulza, that would have been in our best interest. Because for one thing, Haiti, a member of CARICOM, was having problems at the time. And Chile was in the forefront of helping to get some normality in Chile, in Haiti. So, for example, I want the foreign minister to be very clear that in this scenario, if a vacancy exists for Secretary General of the OAS, the decision as to who we are to support must be made by us because it is in our best interest to support a particular candidate. There are times, most times, perhaps all times, when we have to stand on our CARICOM legs. CARICOM legs. One for all and all for one. And not be derailed because any other country, for example, that would want us to support a candidate, that country is asking us to do so because they see it as being in their best interest. If there is a coincidence of interest, then fine. It has happened before, it can happen now, and will happen again. But we need to know, Minister, we need to know where is the government on this. I leave that area and I look now at something dealing with corruption. And don't leave. Okay. I'm sorry, Senator Morgan is not here. Because as Senator Morgan spoke, I said to myself, why am I here? Why am I here? It's his time. It's young people's time. And I felt almost, you know, some kind of fear ran through me because I said, I am an old man, I readily admit it. And I tell you something else. I'm happy about it. I'm happy about it. And you know, strangely too, there are many, many people who would have been quite unhappy if I didn't get to be an old man. Because me would have passed on. And then my mind went, I can't quote the exact passage, but my mind went to this quotation in the Old Testament, I think it is. Honor thy father and thy mother, that thy days may be long in the land which the Lord thy God giveth thee. So, being in the category of the older folk is not a curse, it's a blessing. It's a blessing. And so, Senator Morgan, I hope that you will live beyond the years where I am now, and that in arriving at them, no one will ever try to sideline you, shut you up, or to alienate you. Because that which you don't have now, which is experience, you will have as the years go by, Senator Morgan. Because you have said some things here, Senator Morgan, which reveal your lack of experience. 120.
Speaker's time 120.
Hey, this stuff out.
I beg your pardon, Leader?
Mr. President, the speaker's time having expired, might it be extended to allow him to complete his presentation?
You have heard the question. In favor?
Thank you, colleagues. Let me tell you, you see this corruption thing? I was troubled how he dealt with it, Senator Morgan. I was troubled how Senator Auburn Hill dealt with it. And I told Senator Auburn Hill that I would make some kind of comment on how he did. When Senator Auburn Hill made his contribution, he spoke about hypocrisy. In other words, the hypocrisy of this side in talking about corruption. Wrong approach. Wrong approach. And Senator Morgan traveled almost the same route. Wrong approach. Wrong. If we follow that approach, we will never, ever put this issue of corruption behind us as something which has haunted us and something which has diverted development in this country. Senator Morgan, for example, doesn't know that the Parliament Integrity of Members Act was passed by a government which was led by Michael Manley in 1973. He doesn't apparently know that a JLP senator resigned. He resigned. He said he's not submitting any integrity form. Not doing it. Senator Morgan doesn't know, apparently, that the Contractor General's Act, which came in developed under the JLP regime, that it was amended and strengthened by a PNP regime. He doesn't know, for example, that we are signatories to the Inter-American Convention Against Corruption. This was done under a PNP administration. He doesn't know, for example, that a PNP administration passed the Corruption Prevention Act. He doesn't know. He doesn't know that when we were debating that act, and I was sitting where Senator Webb is sitting there now, and piloting that bill, that the section dealing with illicit enrichment, that it created a big problem in the Parliament. Because whilst those on that side supported it, those who were then on this side didn't.
I wonder who that was.
Hansard has recorded it. I don't think Senator Morgan remembers, for example, that the major organized crime and anti-corruption agency to put a dent in corruption, that was the brainchild of a PNP administration. It was. Then, I don't think that he understands also that the Integrity Commission Act had its conception under the PNP, and then its birth was under the JLP. He doesn't know that the major, did I mention the major organized crime? Yes. The major organized crime, yeah. He doesn't know, for example, that the procurement rules, that's something that was developed by a PNP administration. The Public Bodies Management and Accountability Act, People's National Party. I will tell you something. You see the Integrity Commission Act, there's one section of it that I opposed. I opposed when I was in government, and it was my responsibility at the time to deal with the bill, and I opposed it because I didn't believe it was the correct way to go, and I opposed it all along and still oppose it. And that is that part which has merged the parliamentarians with 70,000 civil servants. And I oppose it because I feel that unless the society is of the view that Caesar is beyond reproach, then they are not going to feel that Caesar's wife should be too. The parliamentarians have to set the stage. We have to be squeaky clean. Squeaky clean. And the more we have these cases being brought against parliamentarians, is the lesser the likelihood of us being able to really grab this thing by the throat and deal with it. And the more we have apologists for it, for corruption, then the society is just going to say, the two of them corrupt. Both sides, then corrupt. Cut it out. Cut it out. I've asked, let us unite on this one.
Mr. President, might the time rather being 1:21, might the Senate be allowed to sit beyond 1:30 to complete the business of the day?
Members have heard. In favor? Against? In favor?
We have to send a message, and clearly, having regard to how Senator Morgan and Senator Auburn Hill spoke, they are not prepared to be messengers. Because if Senator Hill goes out there as a messenger, then they're going to call him a hypocrite.
Yeah, a contract of January 4th.
They're going to say it's hypocrisy. And if this young senator goes out there, they're going to say, him is just part of them. He's just part of them. It can't work. I tell you, when I go up in Northeast St. Catherine, where I go often these days, when I go places, Cassava River, Mizpah, Wallen, Redwood, Center, all these places, there's a problem. They have a water problem. There's one place in I think it's Center, where they're building, the MP, guess what he's building? Pit latrine. Yes. There's a problem. You know, we complain, we say, this one thief, how much million, and the other one thief, how much million, and so on. If you add them up, you can buy that pump. You can dam a river out there. You can fix some road. But they can't have it. Get some beds in hospital. But guess what? It's coming home now to individuals in the society. Individuals who have been denied these things. They are seeing that, look here, if there was not this corruption, we could get so and so and so and so. So we have to deal with it. And stop the rubbish about hypocrisy. I don't talk like no darn hypocrite about it. I talk as one who is passionate about cutting it out. Passionate. I once said in this parliament sitting over there, I said the one time a man should be able to kick a man and get away with it is when you call him corrupt and he's not. So, Senator Hill, Senator Morgan, your absence doesn't surprise me. But even though you are absent, I see both your forms in the chair which you normally occupy. And as I speak to your forms, I say to you both, listen, man, you're either on the side of the anti-corruption advocates or you're not. If you are on the side of the anti-corruption advocates, stop talking about what happened in 1974. Say what happened in 2018 and 2019 must not happen again. Because people are getting fed up. And some people getting, irritable and ashamed of this paintbrush thing. You're selling government land. Sell it for the value.
Don't give it away.
UDC selling Grace Kennedy government land downtown. You know what UDC doing? Trying to get the best deal possible to put it in UDC coffers. And look at, that's what we did. They moved from, I think it was $60 million to $75 million, and every cent accounted for down at UDC. And the place looks good. The development of downtown is PNP. PNP. Senator Webber knows that. Because the Ministry of Foreign Affairs and Foreign Trade. JP didn't have nothing to do with it. That was conceived in New Kingston with Douglas Saunders as the permanent secretary. I just happened to have been the minister. And then we moved on, and it started by UDC with the assistance of the Chinese.
And don't forget the pier, Victoria Pier, that was in ruin.
The board of the UDC at the time, and I just happened to have been the chairman. And Lammy just happened to have been a member. And my friend just happened to have been the chairman of the PBC. Yes. And that's how the Ministry of Foreign Affairs come about. We bought the land from UDC earlier, and then with the Chinese came to an arrangement. Peter Phillips put $90 million in available to UDC to start the process, and it is finished now. Our only hope, JP have nothing to do with it, I only hope that the data open. I don't hear say it name some politician name. I only hope so. Because I'm not telling a lie, I'm not threatening or nothing, just a promise that if a politician name go on it that should not be on it, there is going to be some ruckus. Still, Victoria Pier building. JP have nothing to do with it. Nothing to do with it. It's PNP administration why that development take place. The whole straw market, craft market, 49 million, either 49 or 39 million for renovate it and to put up the buildings beside it to invite people to come downtown. A PNP do that. Portmore. With Forum Hotel. A PNP, JP have nothing to do with it. What JP? But they claim paternity for the development of downtown. And one of the reasons, you see, Senator Samuda, one of the reasons why I'm going to be out there campaign and want you, Senator Samuda, to join in the campaign in which I am involved is this, that they haven't brought a new idea to the table. The only ideas that have been delivered by the JLP are the ideas you have had. You are the senator. You're not even a minister. And guess what they want to do with you? Bury your talent under a bushel. Bury your talent under a bushel of talking to you personally. I'm coming for you. President, I'm going to ask you, as you have so ably led the Senate, as you have so ably chaired the Standing Orders Committee, and as you are a man of ideas, that you see how you can use your influence and your authority to get the Senate as a united body to face squarely and deal appropriately, legislatively or otherwise, and there has to be emphasis on the otherwise, on this cancer of corruption in the society. History will be very kind to you if it can be recorded that the President of the Senate brought both sides of the aisle together to deal with the issue of corruption. On this side, we will be by your side. I don't know about that side.
Thank you, Senator Knight. Senator Samuda, you wanted to take a short break before you present, or you're okay?
2 minutes.
You good? Go ahead, please. Then. Thank you, Senator Knight. Go ahead, Senator Samuda.
Mr. President, I rise to close the State of the Nation debate. And I will pick up where Senator Knight left off with a quote from Mark Twain. There is no such thing as a new idea, it is impossible. We simply take a lot of old ideas and put them into a sort of mental kaleidoscope. We give them a turn, and they make new and curious combinations. We keep on turning and make new combinations indefinitely, but there are the same old pieces of colored glass that have been used through all the ages. In essence, we are creating a better kaleidoscope that gives the Jamaican people a better vision, Senator Knight. I could go to the ideas from some of them from the 1960s, from the 1950s cabinet papers. The fact is, there are no new ideas in many ways. The development plans as drawn up by several governments have been put aside and not implemented. It is this government that is implementing at a faster pace than this country has ever seen. So, Mr. President, I revert to my original thoughts as I have listed here. I wish to thank, again, the Prime Minister for his confidence in me in appointing me to this Senate, or rather recommending me to the Governor General for appointment to this Senate. I wish to thank all fellow senators because this has truly been, since my appointment, a rewarding experience. I thank my colleagues on this side who have advised me. We have worked together. We have become friends. In many ways, we have become family. I wish to thank senators on that side, many of whom I would not have known previous to my appointment, some of which have become also very good friends. I wish Mr. President, on behalf of all of the senators on this side, certainly, and I'm sure my colleagues on that side, though we have said it before, to extend our deepest thanks to those who work in the Parliament. I remember nights where members of the Senate kept them here till 2, 3 o'clock in the morning as we debated particular matters. That was your fault, Sophia. We blame you. You were boosting up everybody on that side. But no, in all seriousness, Mr. President, I wish to extend our deepest thanks to the members of staff of the Parliament, and certainly to you, Madam Clerk. We really appreciate all that you all do, and it does not get seen by the public, but it is definitely beneficial to the process of governance and to our democracy. I'm reminded daily as we enter the Parliament and deliberate on matters that affect the nation that we love so dearly. When you meet people in the streets, when you see them out, that we are fighting for a bigger cause. Sometimes we get into the tit for tat. At the end of the day, as I will speak to, this is a two-party democracy for the most part at this juncture. And we are fighting, however, or debating or pushing, Senator Knight would have made mention of it, for a particular goal. It is at the end of the day development, happiness, progress and prosperity that we want for our people. We disagree many times on how we get there, but at the end of the day it is better that we want for the Jamaican people. And I know that is the case on both sides of the aisle. You know, sometimes as you're preparing for these things, or sometimes just in life, there's a concept called Murphy's Law. Last night my laptop decided it had had enough. And I then had to write using paper, which you know I'm not a big fan of, but I had to write some notes to be able to close today. But no, sir. Well, we don't want single-use materials. At the end of the day, we want to find alternatives to that, and renewables. But I'm reminded, despite those issues and those challenges, and I know everyone here, as they offer their service to the nation through their nomination to the Senate, they will remember and recall that all things are possible through Christ who strengthens me. So, Mr. President, if you will allow me, there's one thing I'd like to do before we dive into the substance of the presentation. I'd like to quote the National Pledge because I think it is important that we remember why we are all here. And it's important to remind ourselves, before God and all mankind, I pledge the love and loyalty of my heart, the wisdom and courage of my mind, the strength and vigor of my body, in the service of my fellow citizens. I promise to stand up for justice, brotherhood, and peace, to work diligently and creatively, to think generously and honestly, so that Jamaica may, under God, increase in beauty, fellowship, and prosperity, and play her part in advancing the welfare of the whole human race. Mr. President, that is indeed why we are here. And though we debate strenuously, we feel differently about how the country, or the steps the country should take to achieve its true potential. We, at the end of the day, put our vim and vigor into our work here. And I certainly wish to congratulate all the members of the Senate, as this is likely to be our last State of the Nation debate before the general election is called. Well, you know, though it is I suppose, whereas I appreciate the sentiment, I have unfortunate news for you. I suspect you may be in the same seat after that process is held. But we come into that. The tenure of the Senate has been interesting. We've debated many bills. We've debated regulations. It has been my pleasure to chair the Regulations Committee of the Senate. We have all, I think, put our best into making sure that the legislation that governs the nation is the best that it can be. And I certainly thank colleagues for the experience. As a graphic popped up on my phone this morning There is, for those who use social media, there is a feature on Facebook Memories. And a graphic that we used at the very start of the political campaign, ahead of the 2016 election, popped up as a reminder today. And it said, very simply, JLP for a better Jamaica. And I reflected as I thought about it, because especially today being the closing of the State of the Nation debate, as we look at the state of the nation, as members on both sides of the aisle have looked at the state of the nation, I reflected and I felt quite comfortable, quite heartened that Jamaica is in a better place because of the decision that it made in February 2016. At the end of the day, the Jamaica Labour Party has delivered a better Jamaica. Now, Senator Knight agrees. He does. Now, we're definitely in a better place. I am sure, indeed, Mr. President, that the country is in a better place. I am sure that it is being governed by the right government. I am sure that we are being led by the right Prime Minister in Andrew Holness. And now that I add that I am sure that one good term deserves another. Mr. President, decisions of governments are not to be taken lightly. The actions and the performance of governments deserve, indeed, deep debate. But in a two-party democracy, for all intents and purposes, I think there may have been registration of a third political party that I heard recently. But in a sense, it's not complete? Okay, well, in a sense, we're a two-party democracy. There is a binary decision that persons must make as you approach an election. They determine whether which side they want to lead their affairs. So it is impossible for us in a political environment such as this to not put forward our achievements. You put forward yours. You certainly have all right and should criticize us when we misstep. And it is impossible for us not to set context why we've made some decisions and why we think we're the better political party. So when we look at this term of government, Mr. President, it is impossible to not look at our performance. And let us reflect briefly, Mr. President. The fact is, our GDP growth, as we have performed in this 4 years, every single year, we await the final numbers this year for the fourth year, but every single year, certainly for the first 3 years of government, Mr. President, reflects greater growth in absolute terms than the previous 4 years before us, Mr. President. It's a fact. Jamaica's reserves are historically high, above $3 billion US. Interest rates, Mr. President, have come down to historic lows of 0.5%. Inflation rates are performing within the target ratio, giving dependability and predictability to not just citizens but businesses alike, Mr. President. At the end of the day, in this economy, we are doing more in 4. Now, when we think about the fact about where do these statistics hit the human element, where do people feel it? One of the greatest achievements of this administration has to be that its work and its decisions have led to the lowest unemployment rate in Jamaica's history of 7.2%. Now, why this rate is interesting is that when we started this debate, the rate was thought to be at 7.8%. And within the course of this debate, the rate has now been declared by Statin to be 7.2%, Mr. President. We are going in the right direction, and one good term deserves another, Mr. President. Well, what is more frightening, Senatorial, is that when we took over, the unemployment amongst youth was in the 39 percentile range. Right now, youth unemployment is at 20%, so we have cut the number of unemployed youth in half, Mr. President. And it is something we are particularly proud of. Now, at the end of the day, Senator Knight would have spent some time on foreign affairs in his presentation. One of the greatest metrics that I think any government has to look at, regardless of all that it does, is the poverty rate. You have to. You can't analyze your performance without considering the poverty rate. And why I mentioned foreign affairs, it is SDG number 1 from the UN. So we can't, absolutely, because the fact is there are less people suffering from poverty under the Jamaica Labour Party administration after 4 years than there were after 4 years of the previous administration. That is a statistical fact. So the fact is, poverty had gone as high as 22%, Senator Morris. Previous to the world recession, you don't get to speak about it without context, Senator Morris. And you know better than that. I know you know better than that. But we'll come back to that, Senator Morris. Jamaica has moved up 4 spots in the most recent Doing Business report, 71st to 75th in 2019. More importantly, our absolute Doing Business score, Mr. President, is at 69.7, up from 68.3, Mr. President. At the end of the day, we are doing more in 4, and the country is moving in the right direction. Now, well, you know, let's discuss some other things. You had your chance at the wicked Senator Knight, but we'll soon come to that in it. Senator Knight, when we look at what is taking place in the country by way of development, and we discuss connectivity, the government of Jamaica has resurfaced and repaired more than 400 roads in our tenure, the most in any single term of government in the history of independent Jamaica. There have been over 30,000 housing starts since we come in, which is more than any other administration in the history of Jamaica. My colleague Senator Fraser-Binns touched housing. That's right. And the truth is our housing debate with the former administration ended in 2018 because we had passed that number in 2018. Now what I find interesting is when you see groundbreakings, it's not just housing, Senator Charles. It is for health centers. Every single month for the last 12 months, I have seen a new health center open. Now what is interesting, it doesn't just open a new one. Every single month when I went back into the newspaper archives for the last year, I've seen a health center repaired and renovated as well. So we are doing more for health care in 4. When we look at police stations, Senator Morgan, is it 193 or 195? I don't know the police stations. Over 190 police stations, Mr. President, are being repaired and renovated under this Jamaica Labour Party administration. So houses, healthcare, roads, but we've also built more square footage of facilities in the education sector than has been done in the last 20 years, Mr. President. And that is a statistical fact. Oh, but, you know, the list of achievements will be printed, and you know the several pages of the newspaper that it will take up. Because we could touch the new Children's Hospital. We could touch what is being done at St. Joseph's. There, I mean, where do you want me to focus? It's not an issue. But what is interesting, colleagues senators, is it's not just groundbreakings with government expenditure. Senator Webby can tell you, because of his role not just at Grace Kennedy, but with the PSOJ, I sure you have invitations to groundbreakings for private sector every single week, if not 2 and 3 a week. The investment being led by the private sector of Jamaica, big and small, is triggering growth. And the fact is, while this government addresses the capacity to grow, because we have uncovered several capacity issues, not just legislatively, not just from a regulatory standpoint. While we address the capacity to grow with the infrastructure and with the investments necessary, the private sector is doing what is required, and they are showing that with their confidence. The business confidence has peaked several times. It goes up and down a little bit, but it is higher than it has ever been in our history right now. Boy, you see, you can't remember hotel rooms. I'm sorry, Senator Crawford not here, because it's something I used to joke about. The best political speech I'd seen from him was when he was running in 2011. Well, we'll soon come to that. Well, let me tell you about Senator Crawford, because I know he's a protege of yours. The best political line I'd seen in the 2011 election, right, came from Senator Crawford. That was when he was better on the stump than he's been recently, to be honest. But the best political line in the 2011 election came from Senator Crawford at the time, when he said the only hotel room Ed Bartlett had built was a community center in his constituency. It was funny at the time, good political job at the time. And he did it in St. James. But he can't say that today. Every single week, we announce the hotel rooms. The newspaper running out of space to print awards because of the best performing tourism minister, not just in the Caribbean, but in the world, Mr. President. But, you know. Well, let me tell you. What is funny? You say people not feeling it. Let me tell you. I don't know how you say people don't feel investments when they get health centers in their community. I don't know how you can say people don't feel investments when you look at something, for instance, and Senatorial would know about this one. When you look at the water project in Junction, St. Elizabeth, bringing water to people who had never had water in all of the history of Jamaica. Now, what I know, when I think of the work being done, Mr. President, can I have your protection, please, sir?
You know that when Senator Knight spoke, he did so without interruption, you know. Likewise, Senator Binns and other senators, I'm not going to allow it. Senator Jeffrey, come now, man.
You know, Mr. President, there is a concept, as I've heard in many recent press conferences. Senator Charles speaks to it every time he does an interview, because I think he's trying to set the context as people try to understand the challenges we face in water. And I touch water because we just mentioned the water project in St. Elizabeth. But he speaks of non-revenue water and how much of the water that we collected and tried to distribute used to leak out. Unfortunately, but you didn't get anywhere with it, Senator Knight. The pipes were clogged. You didn't get anywhere. The fact is we inherited a non-water situation. Senator Knight, you know, I've never interrupted your presentation. Senator Knight, you know, I've never interrupted your presentation. No, well, that's not true, but I hear you. But much like the water that used to leak out. No, hold on. Much like the water that used to leak out before it could get to the pipes of Jamaicans, so too were these grand ideas that we heard about from the other side. It just didn't reach to the people of Jamaica. What you have now is no longer discussions about what was in the pipeline. And I could list achievements from now till tomorrow, Mr. President. We have unclogged the pipeline and we are fixing the distribution network. There are challenges. But, Mr. President, in the same way we are fixing non-revenue water, we are fixing the delivery of projects that have sat and gathered dust, Mr. President, for decades. Senator Skeffrey. The non-revenue water situation has moved from 60% of water leaking out to 40% under this government. We are moving in the right direction. And Mr. President, one good term deserves another. At the end of the day, we soon come to that. Now, you know, President, it's no secret. It's no secret that the area of environment is one which is dear to my heart. Right? When I think of our achievements and I think of our greatest achievement, I think it has to be said that the area of environmental management under the Minister of Environment, who happens to be the Prime Minister, is our greatest achievement this term, Mr. President. What we have done in this area is nothing to scoff at. And I think, I'd said it in my opening, but I say it again proudly. What you have, Mr. President, is the greenest administration in the history of independent Jamaica, and recognized to be so. So, Mr. President, I had shown my colleagues, well, you see, in this case, you know, in this case, it is good that this administration is doing what it takes to be labeled as being green. Mr. President, our environmental management and our environmental achievements include the shift of our energy target for energy being created in your energy mix from 30% to 50% by 2030, Mr. President. The recent designation and announcement that an additional 14% of Jamaica's landmass will be labeled, or be rather protected, put into protected areas, both with the 14 new forestry orders that we passed in the Senate, and what was done to designate the Cockpit Country. This is the largest protected area, Mr. President, in the Caribbean. Let us also understand that with this 14%, Mr. President, Jamaica moves to protecting 30% of its landmass, doubling the targets set by the UN. It is nothing to scoff at. Senator Morgan would have reminded you that we commissioned the largest solar plant in the Caribbean, moving dream to reality, Mr. President, taking it out of the pipeline in Westmoreland. So we are generating more clean energy, Mr. President. When we think of what was done with Wigton, I don't think of it as just a financial achievement. Yes, it brings people who have never purchased stocks into financial inclusion. But what it does, Mr. President, and I've been to some of the environmental forums, it has created a new financing mechanism to do climate-friendly projects and to create clean energy projects, something that has not been seen in Latin America and the Caribbean, and it is something we should be very proud of with the listing of the Wigton shares. When we think of the LNG conversion in Montego Bay, when we think of the 3 million tree planting project with the 3,000 hectares of mangroves that will be replenished, this is nothing to scoff at. When we look at the islands that have been ravaged over the last 4 years from devastating hurricanes, Mr. President, all of the communities within those islands that were worst affected were the ones where there was mangrove degradation. It is not just something nice to do, it is something that will protect our citizens, especially the ones that live in the near coastal areas. When we think of the fact that we're not just adapting, we're mitigating, we think of the coastal revetment projects recently announced downtown Kingston and certainly in the eastern portion of the country in Anata Bay. When we think of the fact that this country has seen brave leadership that turned down requests for coal plants in St. Elizabeth, brave leadership that turned down the investment proposal for Goat Island despite the growth it would have brought. Mr. President, and one that is dear to my heart, and I certainly thank members that would have been on the other side when we passed a particular motion because it found favor with the members on that side. When we think that we led the Caribbean in banning some single-use plastic items, and many countries within Latin America, the Caribbean, and Africa have followed suit right after. I can tell you just how many ministers of environment and industry have reached out to me and asked for copies of the reports. The only unfortunate thing, Senator Brown, is that it's not up to your discretion. But I know you will. Thank you. Thank you. I hear you. Far we have come, Mr. President, but far we must go. But there can be no doubt that when it is related to our environment, when it is related to the steps that we must take to prepare for climate change and to honor our international responsibilities, we have come a long way, Mr. President. And the fact is we are moving in the right direction. Now, the only other target that we have in that area that I don't think we have spoken enough about, and I actually reached out to the opposition spokesperson on environment about, because I wanted to get contextual feel, because I've always said environment and climate change shouldn't be a political issue. One of the things we've not spoken about, we would have signed the climate change agreement, dubbed the Paris Agreement, in 2016. And one of the things we've not taken steps on, despite the fact that it has been on the cards since about 2006, to be honest, is emissions testing, Mr. President. And it is an area that we have to have deep conversation about because it affects lives, not just because of the positives where you get air quality, but it can, in some cases, raise the costs of transportation. So there are political discussions to be had because you need, well, absolutely, it brings the health benefits, but there requires some political consensus to be able to implement something like that. Though it is something we have signed to, and it is something that both sides agreed and shouted about and were excited about when we signed to the Paris Climate Change Agreement. There still needs to be discussion as to how we implement. And it's something that has been absent from the environmental discussion across administrations largely, certainly in the public domain. And it's something that we need to move on very quickly. But Mr. President, I certainly don't want to lose my audience, right? And I noticed that Senator Knight and Senator Horton have left. But this is indeed the closing of the State of the Nation debate allows us to look at the binary option before us. And we had many contributions from colleague senators, and I'd like to hit on a few of the points that certainly stuck out to me. Senator Morris, I remember you made certain commitments to the disabled community, and you listed several things that you felt needed to be done through your varying studies and research that you thought should be done post-haste and should be done within the first 100 days of a new administration. Correct? Is that, I'm not quoting you exactly, but something to that effect.
Yes.
So I went home and I mulled over it because I was deeply concerned. I was deeply concerned that some of these things that you were listing hadn't been done in the past, because I wouldn't have known. It's not the area that I study and focus on. But I was deeply concerned that some of these things needed a champion. And I want to congratulate you personally for championing these causes over your tenure. But I was concerned because you said I was further concerned rather because you said the first 100 days of a new administration. And we on this side knows that there won't be a new administration after the next election. So I'm committing to you while Parliament is prorogued that I'm going to come and sit with you and look at the issues so that we can ensure that anything that is not yet done, I will promise that it will be done in the first 100 days when we are re-elected, Senator Morris. Because we can't afford that group to not be taken care of. Because I agree with you. And as my friend, I will help you fight for that group in Mr. Senator Morris. You have support. So you're not going to get the chance to do it, so we have to go do it for you, Senator Morris, because we agree on the cause.
You get a chance to sit with me with a different capacity.
Well, there you go. But, you know, the debate was interesting. There were politically jarring moments. And there were moments where good ideas and some socially conscious points would have come forward. I remember, I'm sorry he's not here, I remember Senator Horton's presentation. Some of what he put forward on waste management and recycling obviously would have found favor. Though some of it he may not have been aware is already taking place. There were some new ideas that I had deep regard for. What I remember from his presentation, there were 2 points that jumped out at me, and I remember when he came to the Senate, he spoke about the importance of accuracy and, sticking to historical, or sticking to context and making sure that we gave people the full picture. He spoke about devaluation, which since the JLP taking office, though there's a floating exchange rate between about 132 and I think 142 now, which at the high end takes you to about 18% devaluation in a 4-year period. He neglected to mention that in the previous administration, there was near 40% devaluation under the leader of the opposition, now then finance minister. 39.8 or something, so close to 40. So that was left out of the discussion. So when we talk about housing in Senator Fraser-Binns thing and the impact on inflation, when we talk about what that does, we need to give context that the dollar was devalued 39 point whatever the exact figure was percentage in that period of time. So the rate of devaluation, regardless of how you want to debate it, regardless of how you feel about economics and the exchange rate, has slowed considerably under this government.
Having expired, may I ask that his time be extended to allow him to complete his presentation?
Thank you, colleagues. Mr. President, the other, I'd say more infamous moment from his presentation was the discussion around GCT and the rate that would have been discussed. He then labeled that the leader of the opposition had thrown out a bait. And it stirred significant national discourse and national debate. And, he said that when Senator Charles, and I don't remember who was the other person on our side, had said we should consider it, it would only save the average taxpayer X. Yeah. Now, I applaud him at the time for using his significant experience and expertise in that space of economics to give us his position. Now, whereas I would never discount that experience and that significant expertise, I fundamentally wish to put on the record that I don't agree that it is not something we should look at. At the end of the day, though poverty rates have come down significantly, we still have too many people in Jamaica that are living below the poverty line. So we do need to look at the rates of these taxes. And whereas we need to look at tax rates and ensure that we're able to help people. We still cannot move away from indirect taxes because we have too much of our economy living in the gray zone, living outside of the tax net. And it's not something when people making significant money that you can cut indirect taxes. But the rates do need to be looked at, because for someone earning minimum wage or not earning, something like GCT, every dollar counts. So it is something that we need to look at when we're looking at the burden. So regardless of how people feel about the debate, I'm putting on record that it is my position that it is something that should be considered, because too many people in Jamaica are facing the ravages of poverty. Now, we went on, I remember, with Senator Morrison when she looked at the education sector, and she made many points that certainly found favor. I quite like the suggestion today from Senator Morgan on a commission to look at the funding of tertiary education. Well, you know, Senator Skeffrey's motion finds support from me, and I was coming to that, but you've preempted me. But Senator Skeffrey's motion is important. But I have also, and Senator Brown can attest that in every budget presentation I've spoken about his suggestion around a parliamentary committee to look at taxes, because it is one that also finds favor with me. So I have no problem supporting ideas that come from the other side, as my record will show. You know, Senator Longmore, I remember in depth your presentation from yesterday, because so much of the issues that bedevil us are because we've not taken a deep look at the impacts of mental health in the society. It impacts our education system, it impacts our productivity at work, and it certainly impacts it certainly impacts the security of the nation. So I certainly want to also, though we congratulated you yesterday, I want to thank you for bringing that expert advice to the discussion. But you know, I won't bother to go there. I don't know if there's ever been another trained psychiatrist in the parliament. But sometimes when we're having numerical debates, who is that? Who is that? Oh no, that won't happen. That won't happen. You may have to put him in one of those seats in the upper house, but I don't know about that. But you know, excellent presentation, and I remember, well, let me start. Senator Fraser-Binns, though, second to last presentation before closing. I know how passionate she's about land and access to land for all Jamaicans. The only 2 points I wish to make to you, Senator Binns, is you touched about the competition in housing. This is a good competition. The fact is, every administration should want to get every single Jamaican into sturdy dwelling that they, if possible, can own, or certainly access at a rate that they can afford. So it is a good competition. These are the things that both sides should compete on, because if you can do 100,000 and we only do 50,000, you should be able to do it. It is one of those competitions that only benefit the people of Jamaica. So to me, it is a competition that I am happy to participate in. But in this coming competition, Senator Fraser-Binns, we won in 2018, and we were leading and proud of ourselves. We delivered significantly more housing to the people of Jamaica than would have been done by the previous term. But on the topic of bamboo, Mr. President, there are 2 points that the country should be aware of. Recently, bamboo, because it was brought up by Senator Fraser-Binns. So there is a bamboo conference, but there's also been significant work at the Bureau of Standards in testing bamboo to determine how it can be used. And the Bamboo Association has recently announced significant investment which is coming to Trelawney by way of a factory that will be using byproducts of bamboo. But even as it relates to the testing of bamboo in your building standards, that is far advanced, and the country should hear a lot more very soon. All right? But we come to going through, and I don't want to leave out anyone, though not a SON debate. And it's a binary option, right? The political decision that we all make. In the last week's SOE, I'm sorry he's not here. In the last week's SOE debate, my good friend, Senator Crawford, touched the topic of, and his presentations are always like a SON in many ways, because he likes to throw out ideas, and it's good. It's healthy for the debates, right? But he touched the topic of the nickname which some Jamaicans have put on the Prime Minister, being being brokered and what it meant. So I went and I took a look, right? And I had conversations with young and old alike. What it meant to most of them, and that is what is important, is it is a gentleman that they can look up to, is someone that they can relate to, and what it showed was that they were comfortable with this person as their compadre and their leader. But what Senator Crawford didn't discuss, because what he was bringing up was the imagery associated with how we communicate our rejection of crime and violence. And I said to him, certainly sotto voce, I said, well, if we're dealing with imagery, right, because sometimes imagery, well, not sometimes, all the time imagery is important as we try to send a signal to citizens. We have to take these things seriously. So he raised a concern, but I raised a concern to him, which one that needs to be dealt with. In the recent internal elections, there was a press release. In the recent internal PNP elections, there was a press release sent from the Rise United camp that spoke to the other camp being one PNP, walking with, what was it? Washed up dance. So, if we're going to talk about symbolism and imagery, the same way we're going to approach a corruption discussion, and Senator Knight would have said we need to discard it and we need to totally separate ourselves from it and condemn it. Then you have to condemn that sort of situation as well, because it is, but you link crime and corruption all the time, Senator Knight. So I'm following your good example. So, Senator Knight, if we are saying that we need on both sides to cut any imagery that gives you that sort of projection, then we know people will say things in a political contest, but then the former challenger needs to either say whether it was just a political statement and he was incorrect, or the current leader needs to say that no such thing occurred and speak to the specific individuals that would have been mentioned. But there were two other presentations. There's one today from my good friend Senator Miles, and he spoke heavily to upliftment. He also spoke to education. And he spoke to the climate change agenda, and I certainly wish to applaud him for that space. Then came Senator Knight's presentation. Now, are you a cricketing man, Senator Knight? Are you a man that likes cricket? So I've seen your General Secretary at cricket from time to time, but I've never seen you there. But I've been to the club too, I've never seen you. It's odd, you need to go more often. But I was, admittedly, so I'm a fan of your archer skills, right? But I was a little worried for you in your presentation. I was a little worried for you in your presentation, because Senator Scott Motley being your coach, with you having such a long innings with no runs on the board, I was worried she was going to send you back to the pavilion. I was a little concerned for you. I was worried for him, Mr. President, because I'm a fan of your archer skills, and I read some of your old presentations from time to time, but I was worried for you. No, I'm giving my view and my take on the State of the Nation debate. So whereas I'm a fan of his archer skills, and usually I enjoy your contributions to our varying debates, I thought as a good cricketer I was a little concerned for you today. I was a little concerned, admittedly. But, Mr. President, well, boy, after that long run-up, such a slow delivery was quite concerning also, Mr. President, if that is the case. And I know Senator Webby is a cricket man as well, so he understands quite clearly my my concerns. But, Mr. President, Mr. President, I reviewed how I saw the contributions to the State of the Nation. And in my own presentation opening the debate, I gave my assessment on the state of the nation. And as we come, potentially, maybe this is the last, maybe it's the second to last State of the Nation. But as we give our State of the Nation, potentially heading into a general election, we have to remember it's a binary decision. And all of the polls, regardless of pollster, regardless of market researcher, tell us that the country is still very leader-centric in terms of how it looks at leadership, how it looks at its decision-making process. And I certainly am proud of the leader that I have. It's Martin Luther King Jr. who said it, the ultimate measure of a man is not where he stands in moments of comfort and convenience, but where he stands at times of challenge and controversy. In moments of challenge and controversy, Prime Minister and the JLP leader, the Most Honourable Andrew Holness, has made the right decisions and adopted the right stance, Mr. President. You know, when confronted with the crime monster that has bedeviled this country, certainly for the last 30 years at a rate which is totally unacceptable, he has fought and made the decisions, even gotten criticism for the use of one of the tools that we have made. But he has done everything within his power to not just make the decisions necessary, but to put the money and the investment behind the national security apparatus. Mr. President, he has used a measure, which is this SOE, to ensure that we try our best to save Jamaican lives. Because for far too long, too many Jamaicans have lost their lives in a violent manner. I doubt that. But when we consider that even as far back as 2011, Mr. President, when he first got reins of leadership of the country, he had to confront the economic challenges that would have come, certainly within our term, from the greatest recession since the Great Recession. But he also had to confront the debt burden that would have been inherited from the disastrous policies of the period of FinSAC, for instance, Mr. President. And he came to the country and was honest with the country. He said there would be tough times ahead. He didn't come and say everything would be fine right after. He was honest with the country. And as a former cabinet minister, he spoke to the challenges that we faced. But he never forgot the fact that we had implemented the most extensive and best run debt exchange in the world at the time, and had been listed as such in the JDX. And we never ignored the fact that there had been malfeasance before from our administration and previous administrations, and he took on the challenges and acknowledged it. Mr. President, leadership is important. Every time we have had a challenge in this administration, he has stepped to the front and shown the country why he's the right person to manage the space. We now have record job numbers, stable inflation rate, unemployment is at an all-time low, and the economy continues to grow. Mr. President, regardless of how the people wish to label him, bro God, prosperity boss, at the end of the day, when the parliament is passed, nobody is labeling him as such. As fact, the corruption perception index, as shown by Senator Morgan, if we consider what it is how people perceive it. No, but Senator Knight, it is how people perceive it. And people perceive him to be less. No such thing, Senator Knight. No, he's not. And you know better. You know better than that, Senator Knight. Mr. President, when there has been issues of corruption, the Prime Minister has stepped to the front and ensured that action is taken where necessary, that investigative agencies are resourced appropriately, and as legislation comes to the Parliament when necessary. This Prime Minister is making Jamaica proud, Mr. President. The administration is making Jamaica proud. And though we are coming to the end of a parliamentary term, potentially, I am telling you, Mr. President, we have certainly done more in all areas of development, and one good term deserves another, Mr. President. Thank you for your time.
Samuda. Senator Samuda. Senator Samuda. What?
Ask that the motion be approved.
The motion moved by Senator Samuda be approved. Those in favor?
Aye.
Against? Ayes have it. The motion is approved. Senator Charles?
Let me first, Mr. President, ask for your permission to speak from a seat. Mr. President, permit me to first, as I said, seek your permission to speak from a seat that is not my own, and then...
You're going to ask for the recommittal
Yes.
of... Yes, okay, thank you.
Yes. And to seek the recommittal of the item, statements by minister or ministers.
The question is the items...
And also notices of motions given orally.
I suspect that that's a statement by the Minister of Foreign Affairs and Foreign Trade.
Yes.
No.
She had indicated Senator Knight.
No. Don't bother table no statement. I want her in the seat when she's presenting it on her feet. She mentioned it to me, but I paid little regard to what.
All right, so you prefer to wait for another time?
Yes, I will wait for
No
it.
problem, no issue. Senator Charles, go ahead.
But would it offend, Mr. President?
The member says that he prefers to wait, so no problem. Move on.
Well, I was going to table it and then perhaps...
Senator Charles, will you please move on?
Yes, sir.
I don't have an issue, the member says that he prefers to wait for another occasion.
The acting leader, as usual, is correct in his position. He asked whether or not it would be fine with us if he tabled it, but when she comes, she has to speak to it. And we agreed. And, again.
That's what we were intending to do, by the way,
But you kept interrupting the
No, you
young
interrupted
leader.
the minister.
Okay,
Senator Knight.
I praised you earlier. I don't want to withdraw anything.
No, we can keep her behind you, so let me deal with this. The question is that the statements by ministers be recommitted. Those in favor?
We say that.
Against? Okay, so what you intend to do, Minister?
I was simply tabling the statement of the minister. That is it.
Okay, thank you very much. Would you table it? And on a future time, when the minister is here, no doubt it can be presented.
Such it is.
Okay.
On to the notices of motions given orally for recommittal, Mr. President.
The question is that the item designated notices of motions given early be recommitted. Notices of motions given orally be recommitted. Those in favor?
Aye.
Against? Yes, Minister.
Mr. President, I beg to give notice that at the next meeting in the Senate, I will move the following. Be it resolved with reference to the sessional select, joint select, and select committees which are appointed in the current session of Parliament, and where these committees have not completed their deliberations, that in the new session of Parliament the Senate be empowered to enable these committees to proceed with the issues referred to them from the stage reached before prorogation. Be it further resolved that the composition of all these committees remain unchanged except where necessary by further motion taken and approved by this Honourable Senate. And be it further resolved that the name Pernell Charles Jr. be removed from the Senate Standing Orders Committee and the name Matthew Samuda be substituted therefore.
Did you just read your removal?
I read my own removal. And be it further resolved with reference to all government business, private members' motions and matters referred to committees which are on order of business of the Senate at the time of prorogation of this session of Parliament, but for which deliberations have not been started or completed, that in the new session of Parliament the Senate be empowered to proceed with these matters from the stage reached before prorogation. Mr. President, I further beg to give notice that at a later stage today I will move for the suspension of the standing orders to enable me to take this motion.
The only thing I have to question is whether or not Senator Morris and I were consulted about Senator Samuda being put on the Standing Orders Committee. Eh? Thank you very much. Senate Minister, yes, go ahead, please.
Sorry, Mr. President, I now move for the suspension of the standing orders to enable me to take the motion, notice of which I gave earlier.
Members have heard the question. Those in favor? Against? Minister?
Yes, Mr. President, colleagues, we're all aware of the motion of which I gave notice earlier. So I ask that you submit it to Senate for the motion to be approved or otherwise.
President,
I've heard.
yeah,
Sorry.
I intend to speak on the motion. So, Mr. President, if we look at the other paper, it contains a number of motions for which this carryover resolution is intended. There are 17 private member motions. At least 3 have been on the other paper since 2016, which means that they were carried over in 2017, carried over in 2018, carried over in 2019, and now we're asking them to be carried over in 2020. There are at least 3 from 2017, carried over in 2018, carried over in 2019, and now we're asking for them to be carried over in 2020. This makes no sense. We need to find a way to resolve the private member motions. We can't be carrying them over for 4 or 5 years, well, 25, but we can't be carrying them over in this way. And what it does, Mr. President, it discourages people, members of the Senate, from putting resolutions on the table and to have these resolutions discussed. I, for example, Mr. President, would have loved this week to put a motion recognizing the brilliance of that 9-year-old from Marchpen Road, Torian Beckford, in winning the Gleaner Spelling Bee competition. But I could have put it and no debate for the next 5 years by when she's about to leave high school. I'd have loved yesterday to have put a motion about the assault by members of the Jamaica Defense Force and young men in Jarrett Lane. But I realize that these motions are not going to be debated. I don't know if my name being associated with any of them is the reason. Certainly Senator Skeffrey has his name associated with some, and those have not been debated. I'd have loved, in talking about Torian Beckford, to mention Israel Burton, who was a runner-up, 13-year-old from St. George's College. I'd have loved to mention young Errol Campbell, the coach who coached both of them, who is taking over from Reverend Glenn Archer success. But it makes no sense to put these motions on the table if they're not going to be debated. I suggest, you're probably right, Senator Knight, a new leader. But Mr. President, I'd like to suggest a different approach be taken to resolutions. It makes no sense to have resolution on the agenda every week. But we're not going to debate the resolutions when they come. For questions, we have 21 days for which they must be answered. I would think, Mr. President, your standing order committee.
Yeah, you have on the standing orders committee, you have Senator Knight, Senator Fraser-Binns, and Senator Scott Motley. You could suggest to them that they raise.
Well, I'm doing it on the floor, so answer can get it, so it will not be a new idea in the kaleidoscope. I am simply recommending that if a motion that is taken to the President, approved by the President, that such a motion should be debated within 90 days. Within 90 days. We can organize and arrange our business or agenda of the Senate to take such a resolution in 90 days. It can't be, Mr. President, that the leader of government business, you having approved a resolution, then decide, I am not putting it on the agenda.
Senator Brown, don't make it sound like it's new, you know.
No, I don't care when it's new. That's your problem.
No, man. No, that's not my problem.
No, I am speaking, Mr. President.
What I'm saying is,
I am speaking, Mr. President.
All I'm saying, it's 2:30. Make the proposal through the members.
Mr. President?
Make the proposal through your members on the committee.
No. As a member of the Senate, I'm entitled to put it on the table here. There's a motion before us.
When somebody else was up here.
Mr. President?
Almost 40 of them never took one during the 4 years when I was sitting over.
Mr. President, let me make it clear. It cannot be that the leader of government business determine whether or not a motion...
Why you never said so before? You could have said so before, you know. All I'm saying to you have 2 members on the committee. Raise it there and stop the sanctimonious
I'm entitled to speak in this debate, and I'm so doing.
Plus extension.
I'm so doing. That is, thank you very much. And I hope you will listen. Yeah. Well, that's why I can only hope. Mr. President, let me make it clear. Democracy requires that the opposition,
democracy requires consistency.
Why are you interrupting?
Democracy requires consistency.
Democracy requires that the voice of the minority be also heard. And what I find happening is that by not bringing these resolutions, effectively we're stifling the minority, we're stifling dissent, and that cannot be good for democracy. Mr. President, Mr. President, unfortunately, your partisanship is coming out so strongly in contrast to what Senator Fraser-Binns said of you this morning. So in other words, the stifling of democracy cannot and must not be condoned. When resolutions are put, they need to be taken. And it cannot be, as I've said, that you put off a resolution, move in 2016, you carry it over in 2017, carry it over in 18, carry it over in 19, carry over in 20. And the good thing is that you may not be there in 21 to carry it on, and these resolutions will be taken. May it please you, Mr. President, and your meddling in my comments are not really appreciated.
Let me tell you something. I am permitted to meddle in anybody's comment where I see that it is misguided. I appreciate exactly what you are saying, and I'm suggesting to you, put it to the members on the Standing Orders Committee, and we will give it extensive consideration.
Mr. President, further to such a riveting debate, I think that we can now move to ask for you to put the motion.
Members have heard the motion. Those in favor? Against?
Mr. President, I don't believe that we have anything much more to do. But given that it is Perhaps, Mr. President, we're going to adjourn Saturday until Tuesday, right? Well, my apologies. Adjourn Saturday, but we expect to be back Tuesday for our opening of the ceremony. I want to just, I know that we perhaps can speak on Tuesday, but I want to use the opportunity just to say thanks again to all of my colleagues, and also to the staff. Given that Tuesday may be the final day of the sitting of Senate for some of us, or for one of us, but it is certainly, Mr. President, a Friday which I would like to use the opportunity to express my gratitude to you as President and colleague and the wise role model that you've been to so many of us. As I sit here, Mr. President, you bring such a flavor to this House that I think that everyone, especially your very good friend Senator Lambert Brown, can say that we appreciate you in your distinct service to this House. I also sat here, Mr. President, and listened to colleagues giving their State of Nation debate. Senator Morgan, in his maiden debate, who I think did well. Senator Matthew Samuda, who I believe thereafter might have the opportunity to become a preacher. He did very well. But Senator Knight, who I share a very special relationship with, because as Queen's Counsel, he won't remember when I was a young attorney and he came into the courtroom and advised me that he knew my parents and was very kind on that day. I was a prosecutor, and the only time. But just from the three presentations, we definitely see that Jamaica is in good hands. We may not have all the solutions now, but I think certainly with the youth, the experience, and the action, we're going to get there. So again, thank you to my colleagues, and we adjourn Saturday until we meet again next week for the opening of the ceremony.
The question is?
Mr. President, I speak on behalf of all of my colleagues who sit on this side. When we are in that room, we do not only discuss matters pertaining to the Senate, but we do discuss the senators themselves. And I will say that there is unanimity about the feeling that we have about Senator Charles. We respect him. In working out all the functioning of the Senate when he presides, we appreciate the cordiality, the gentility, and the reasonableness with which he approaches these matters. Mr. President. That was a private communication. Mr. President, I hope that I do not trespass by saying that two good people are running against each other in this Southeast Clarendon. Two people who will bring fresh minds and different energy to the lower house. And for this reason, you want both of them there. But that is not going to happen. I wish... I find myself in a very invidious position, but it is my nature to be very straightforward and frank. I don't want him to go down there. I've told him already. But the regard and the respect that I have for him must be recorded, Mr. President, because it is a genuine expression of how I feel, and I think all of my colleagues feel. He has a contribution to make to Jamaica. He has a fine intellect, and he has personal integrity, which I must tell you I value very, very highly. I thank you for giving me the opportunity, Mr. President, if it pleases you.
I'm not going to speak about Pernell Jr. because he knows the extent to which I have the highest regard for him. There are many who thought that the biggest mistake he made in his life was to leave the Director of Public Prosecutions and come into this aspect of public service. But time has shown that he has made the right decision, and we trust that he will continue to make a contribution to this Jamaica land we love. The question is the Senate be adjourned, sign and aye. Those in favor? Against? This Honourable Senate now stands adjourned, sign and aye.